before we get to that, we do have a call to order. So, Aaron,
Here.
Carla,
Here.
Tom,
Here.
John,
Here.
Sean,
Here.
and Chuck Robinson is here, and we have Dr. Doherty, Assistant Superintendent Kelly, Student Services Jennifer Stiles, and CFO Gail Dowd, and Scott Mullen is helping us with our technology. I think I got everybody right that's here tonight. So I don't know whether we can do reports. Does the administration or central office have any reports? Jen?
We do not have any reports.
Okay. Committee reports? Aaron?
I don't have any reports tonight, Chuck.
Okay. Carla?
No reports.
Tom?
No, sir, nothing.
John?
Nothing.
And Sean?
Nothing tonight.
And I do not have a report. The other thing I wanted to mention is we will be receiving public input via the email, which is Reading School Committee at reading.k12.ma.us. And for items not on the agenda, we will hear those after So we'll accept input on after the committee speaks on the presentation. Following that, we'll listen to any or read any public input that we get that isn't regarding tonight's agenda item. And just one other comment before I turn it over to Dr. Doherty is first, thank you to all the community members, staff, parents, teachers, everybody that have sent us emails. I know it is a short response from me that we've received it, and that's appropriate because I don't want to weigh in on value judgments for the committee on feedback that we're getting. But we do thank you for that, and there's been a lot of them. So I apologize. I think we got them all. If we don't, I'm usually reminded, so we try to get to them all. And they do go in the packet unless somebody specifically requests that it doesn't go in the packet. So and I honor that request. Further to that, anything that we got today through the mid-morning, I tried to respond to, but some of the ones in the afternoon we didn't get to yet. Hopefully those questions will be addressed in the presentation tonight, and if not, and certainly we will respond to those. So I appreciate everybody's patience with that, and again, we try not to miss anybody, and it certainly isn't done by design or on purpose. So thank you for that. And Dr. Doherty, just one more thing. So as I mentioned before the last meeting, we try to keep our discussions to policy. So just be careful with operational type dialogues and going down that. And I understand that's difficult, but just try to be careful with that. So I appreciate it. And Dr. Doherty, you ready to go?
Sure. I'll bring up the presentation. So before I begin, I just want to thank all of the staff that helped put the report together, which was released a couple of days ago. There was a very quick turnaround between the July 31st preliminary plans and the comprehensive plan, which is due next week to DESE. So first I want to thank our central office administrators, Gail, Chris, Jen, and Jen, who is no longer here, but also played a key role in the development of the plan, for the hours and hours of work that they did in running the committees, gathering the information, creating the work that you saw in these reports. It was obviously a monumental task, and one thing has been made very clear to us. And I know that people have different opinions about the plan, but one thing we've heard loud and clear is that people do appreciate the level of detail and the quality of the work. So that's a testament to everyone, both here at central office, our building principals who were also on those committees, our teachers. We had parents on the committees. So a tremendous amount of work has been done behind the scenes for the creation of the plans for your review tonight. So what we wanted to first start with is our plan is based on guiding principles. And what you see here are a set of guiding principles that we followed as we developed this plan. First of all, we want to make sure that we create environments that foster the physical and mental health, safety, engagement, and purposeful learning as our core values. We want to make sure that we model equity, inclusion, and diversity throughout our district in our building decisions. You'll see that reflected in the plan. Academic achievement is obviously going to be a priority through high quality instruction, enrichment activities, and culturally responsive educational practices. We want to meet the students where they are and foster the learning as a lifelong process. We're going to collaborate and share the responsibility with all stakeholders. As you can imagine, this has been truly a team effort and collaborative effort, and that will continue as we implement these plans. Obviously, we're going to be revising as we go along. There'll be continuous improvement with these plans. They are not going to be perfect to start, and we know that. But we will continue to move forward and make the changes necessary in the best interest of the kids and the health and safety of our students and staff. We want to make sure that the communication is transparent and frequent and consistent as much as possible to keep people in the loop of what's going on. And we want to make sure that we have balance to meet the needs of our school community. And certainly we want to prioritize those students and families who have trouble accessing, engaging in remote learning. So those are the guiding principles that we've been using as we've developed these plans, and will continue as we move forward. So one of the things that I first want to talk about, because I know that this has been discussed throughout the forums, and I'm sure on social media as well, is it safe to come back? And we really need to balance this view of risk and the decisions around us going back to school. We have to take a look at several different factors. Certainly the risk itself, the COVID-19 risk, and that's continuing to look at the health data from Massachusetts and where they are. Obviously, every state right now has different metrics that they're using based on the infection data that they're getting. Massachusetts is at the lower end. I'm going to show you that in a minute. But we also have to take a look at other pieces to this. One is the loss of learning that has happened. And we know for a fact that the lack of in-person education can result in a 30% or decrease in some cases in reading and 50% in math learning compared to gains in a typical school year. There's a social and emotional impact with the decisions of not coming back in person in some form. And we've discussed this in the past, that the emotional and mental health of our children, our students, is paramount. With that, we also have to keep an eye on the other risk factors, child abuse being one of them. We are all mandatory reporters, and so coming to school is an area that we can see how kids are doing with the in-person piece. Nutritional insecurity, those numbers we've seen increase this summer. Obviously, there are families that are in that state, and that number may get higher, as the unemployment rate changes or the unemployment benefits may be reduced or something like that. So we have to keep an eye on that. The loss of parental employment is another big factor that we need to balance in our view. And then the lack of access to essential services, special ed services, speech and language, all of those services that our children need, and they benefit more from an in-person environment than a remote environment. So all of these things we need to take into account as we're looking at what model should we go forward with. This is a chart that shows the data from Johns Hopkins University. It's the percent of positive tests of the average of the last 7 days. These are all the states. And what it shows, if it's in the green, it's below a 5% positivity. And if it is less than a 5% positivity, that's one of the metrics that's being used on whether or not schools should open with some sort of model of in-person learning. The ones in the yellow are greater than 5%. Massachusetts is where you see the arrow. I believe right now we're at 2.66% positive tests. So that's a factor certainly that we have to look at. So right now there are 38 states that are higher than that recommended positivity. So you've seen this chart before. We are putting together 3 plans. We've submitted, or we will be submitting 3 plans. We did submit 3 preliminary plans to DESE last Friday. I do want to mention, because I have heard this a couple of times in the forums, is the plans that we presented last week to the community were really bare bones plans that were based on the requirements that we had to do for the Department of Education. Obviously, what we're presenting tonight in the plan that we released a few days ago is a much more comprehensive plan that we will be submitting next week. So it didn't have a lot of the details that you see in this plan. So those three plans include the in-person learning plan with the new safety requirements, and the new safety requirements that they discussed were the 3-foot minimum. The hybrid learning plan, which is the plan that we are recommending this evening as the preferred plan at this time, and then the remote learning plan, which we are giving that option to all families. The 4th plan, which we're not even considering yet, is when we have no restrictions. This would be in an environment where you have probably 0.5% infection positivity, positive tests or below. And this is at the point where you have a vaccine and that vaccine is successful. So I want to talk a little bit about the school calendar, because one of the things you are going to be doing tonight is voting on a new school calendar, and that was in the packet, and it was also part of the last page of the plan. Obviously, this calendar is going to be just as fluid as everything else right now, but right now, the school year begins for staff on August 31st. It will include 10 days of training. The department reduced the amount of required school days from 180 to 170, which allows us to use those 10 days prior to the start of the school year for a variety of staff training and giving teachers the necessary planning time they need for two different models, an in-person model and a remote learning model. As part of those 10 days, in discussions with Principal Boynton, we're going to be having small group. It is our plan to have small group orientation during those 10 days, which would be led by the administration. Those would be groups of 10. They'd have different parts of, obviously it would include a tour, but also going over some of the routines, procedures, things like that about the high school. So that's in the planning stages right now. The school year right now we're proposing begins for students on Tuesday, September 15th. At that point, all will start remote until it is phased in. We're proposing a phased-in model. In the calendar, you'll see there are 4 additional PD days and 1 conference day that is part of the regular teacher contract. So in addition to these 10 days, there are 5 other days that are part of the teacher's contract for conference and professional development. November 3rd is the national election, so we're going to have that as a remote learning day for all students. And the reason for that is that would probably be a heavy voting day here at the field house. So it would be best to have that as a remote learning day to avoid additional opportunity for any contact. There is a possibility during the year, and this is in the plan of heat emergency. We're going to use the heat index from the National Weather Service as the guide for measuring the outdoor temperature and humidity, and snow emergency days. Those will be following a remote learning day schedule if we have to call them. All state holidays are observed as no school days, and the last school day right now will be June 17th, and there are no snow days built in to that calendar. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to do a phased-in hybrid model, or we're proposing a phased-in hybrid model. Families will have the choice of either that model or the fully remote model. The students are going to begin in remote learning until they're phased in, when they will then begin the hybrid model. Essentially, if they are part of the hybrid model, they'll be divided into 2 cohorts, A and B. Cohort A will be in person Monday through Thursday for 1 week. Cohort B will be remote for that week, and then the following week they will flip-flop. Friday will be a half-day remote learning day for both cohorts. That additional time is the equivalent of the Wednesday piece at the old Wednesday piece at the elementary. The additional time is going to be needed by staff for meetings, collaboration, planning. Again, we're going to be now in 2 different schooling models, and this additional time is going to be necessary. It is our plan right now to have all the students in the RISE preschool, including students who receive special education services and their typical peers, students with disabilities in special education programs, and others determined to be at risk will be in person both weeks. So that would include homeless students, EL students, and foster students, except for Fridays. And we'll look at this on an individual basis for different types of students at risk. So there are essentially 4 cohorts in the hybrid model. I've already mentioned A and B. Cohort C are all of those students that are going to be in person each week. And in cohort D are the ones that will be fully remote. And that's a family request for either health reasons or another reason. And the families do not have to provide any documentation as to why they're choosing this cohort. Should also talk about that the cohort D, the fully remote model, that's going to look different at a grade level based on some factors that we don't have answers to yet. And I know it's a little frustrating for parents at this point who are trying to figure out which model works best But we need to know first how many students would be opting for the fully remote model. And we also need to know what staff will not be able to come in person due to medical or health conditions that we would potentially be using as remote teachers. So those are still unknowns. And as soon as we get that information, which we will begin sending out questionnaires tomorrow after the vote is taken, then we'll have better answers for staff and the community. So as I mentioned, we're proposing a phase-in model. There's a lot of reasons for this, which I'll get into in a minute. But essentially, the way this is going to work is the 9/15, which is a Tuesday. That week will be pre-K and high needs students will be in person. We'll have kindergarten screening for the 4 days, and then everyone else will be remote except for grade 6 cohort B, and that is a transition grade. 9/22, we start phasing in the cohort A for K to 2, then cohort A for grade 6. And the reason why we moved grade 6 up is closer is that we wanted the 6th grade to be able to have a week to get acclimated to the middle school as a separate group rather than have 7th and 8th grade there at the same time. So that's why you see the 6th grade up so early in the phase-in. 9/29, you see by in the schedule that now we introduce grade 3 through 5 cohort B and grade 7-8 cohort B. 10/5, now we add 3 to 5 cohort A, 7-8 cohort A, and 9-10 cohort now is introduced as well. If you remember, 9-10 is one cohort. We don't have an A and B for 9-10. That's one cohort. 11-12 is the other cohort. I believe Mrs. Boynton is calling this 11-12 the upper academy and 9-10 the lower academy. And then 10-12, you could see that we now introduce 11-12. So by the week of 10-12, all of the cohorts will have been in person 1 week, at least 1 week. So why the reasons for the phase-in? There's actually several reasons why we're trying to phase this in and making sure that we test our systems as we move from grade to grade. So as I mentioned earlier, we're actually trying to open up 2 different school models at the same time in a brand new environment. The rules have essentially changed. The traditional school that we were accustomed to prior to March 13th does not exist anymore. There's a lot of new procedures, health regulations, cleaning and disinfecting. There's a lot of things that are going to be different. So phasing it in 1 grade span at a time, with attention being given as much as possible to the transition groups, makes sense. We need to test, as I mentioned, all of our systems, including the cleaning and disinfecting, the technology infrastructure, the food service, bathroom procedures, arrival and dismissal, health and safety precautions, as well as the phase-in for the transition grades. And a very big concern is it's going to give us time to fill unfilled staffing positions created by leaves. We essentially have 3 weeks starting tomorrow, and I don't want to say this too loud because the building principals I know are already anxious about this. We essentially have 3 weeks to process the leaves and hire staffing to fill those positions if school were to open at the regular time. We're going to need that time to post the positions, interview, fill those positions with qualified candidates, and also developing the schedules that we need once we know the data of what students are remaining fully remote and what students are not. So I already described to you the students that should stay in person full-time with all models. This is described in the guidance by Desi. Jen Stice, in her segment of the report on special education, does a great job explaining all of this information. But these would be the students that we would recommend staying in person full-time with the models. I do want to talk a little bit about ventilation because I know that's a question that's come up a lot. And obviously, we've done a lot of research into the ventilation systems in the Reading Public Schools. And first, I'm going to actually skip to the third bullet for a second first. One of the things that Reading has benefited from because of the community support is that we have a 10-year capital plan. A 10-year capital plan which is reviewed and updated a couple times a year. And in that capital plan is a preventative maintenance portion of that plan that takes a look at all of our infrastructures. But one of the most important infrastructures that takes a look at is our HVAC systems. And over the years, either through new building projects or through the capital plan, we have updated all of our univentilator equipment in our buildings. So even our older buildings, Killam, Birch Meadow, have had updated univentilator systems put in. And with the new building projects that we've had over the last several years, obviously that was part of it. So that's an important point. In a lot of other school districts that perhaps are looking at a remote model versus a hybrid model or an in-person model, you're talking about buildings that are much, much older. They did not update their ventilation equipment in a timely manner. So there are a lot more issues there which are going to force them to take a different look at which model they should be doing. So I think that's an important point. And that's kudos to our facilities department, our community town manager, for finance department for putting together a capital plan that makes sense. Our facilities department worked with the manufacturer of all of our HVAC equipment and our HVAC outside contractor to do a thorough review of all of that, the univentilators, the rooftop units, and exhaust ducts. I do want to mention HVAC, the univentilators are located in every classroom space. So that's an important point. Each univentilator has its own filter system. And what the manufacturer has determined is all of our equipment meets or exceeds the manufacturer and state standards for the correct number of air exchanges with the outside air. So that means that the correct amount of fresh air is coming in all of our equipment in our classrooms. We are also we will be transitioning to a MERV 13 filter. So the MERV 13 filter filters out the SARS-CoV virus particulates. And that's also an important point. So we are transitioning to that filter. I will say that one of the disadvantages of using the MERV 13 filter is it does, it really does, it puts wear and tear on your equipment at a greater rate. So because we have newer equipment, that is not as much of an issue here. And certainly we will continue to, use our preventive maintenance plan. But much older systems, if they're just putting in the MERV 13 filters, they're going to have issues with their equipment. The filters will be changed outside of school hours. That's what the Fridays and most likely Saturdays and Sundays will be, because we will need to change these more frequently because it does take more of the particulates in. So that's also an important point. The ventilation system itself uses the outdoor air. Obviously, one of the things we need to keep in mind is that as you introduce more and more fresh air into the rooms in the colder months, that means it's going to be colder. because the air won't have time enough to get warmed up. So we may have to, we'll have to take a look at that and balance that to make sure that, it's comfortable learning environment as possible, but also as safe and healthy. Some other pieces, I've already mentioned about the preventive maintenance program. Obviously, part of this will be looking at the ducts and intakes and clean those on a regular basis. Bathroom exhaust fans will be on throughout the hours of operation. That's an important point because in most school buildings, bathrooms do not have windows. We'll be using paper towels instead of air dryers, and on the buses, the windows are going to be opened at all times for those students that'll be using the mandatory transportation. I do want to talk a little bit about kindergarten, because that's a question that's come up as well. We are working on a plan that's going to allow full day and half day kindergarten in the buildings both weeks, similar to what we're doing with RISE. One of the challenges with this is we have to take a look at classroom space availability, and that's going to require some creative scheduling, which our elementary principals are working on right now. We also have to take a look at staffing for those additional week in the satellite classroom. If for some reason we aren't able to provide the programming for both weeks for half day and full day, we will recommend to the school committee at a later date a tuition reduction, recognizing that it is a different type of program if you're going to a hybrid. And I believe that's it.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Doherty. I would, at this point, I think have a motion first, and then we'll have discussion following the motion.
Taking myself off mute, apologies. I move to approve the fall reopening overview as presented, with the understanding that the situation is fluid and changes to the plan are likely.
Second.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Sean. Okay, I would now open it up to the committee discussion, and following that, as I mentioned earlier, we will, and we have several emails, we will try to answer the community questions as well. So, John?
Thanks,
John Parks?
Thank you. One of the things that, and I know Desi and the state are working on guidelines for opening when we go into different phases, things like that. Until those come out, we have no guidelines that are established. I'd love to see this tied into whatever phase the state is currently at. So if we're at phase 2, we're gonna be in remote. If we're at phase 3, we're gonna be in hybrid. If we're in phase 4, we're gonna work on what phase 4 would be. I can't see voting on this without something tied to it until Desi gives us those updates. Because I don't think we have enough information to say we're going to go into remote right now with no guidelines on where it's going to be. So if we can tie this into where the state phase is, I'd feel a lot more comfortable until Desi comes out with their guidance.
John, did you have a response, or?
Yeah, Desi's giving us the guidelines next week. We heard that today from the commissioner.
But I've got to vote tonight, John.
I know.
Without having it tied to something, I'm not comfortable voting on this.
Well, I put in the presentation, John, that we will be using specific metrics. Maybe I didn't say it, sorry, but I have it in the PowerPoint.
But we don't know what those metrics are. And that does bother me. We've got to have clear reasons to switch from different phases.
which is fine, but I would need the latitude to change to those metrics once they come out.
Oh, I completely agree. But until those metrics come out, can we set it to the state phase? And once those metrics come out from DESI, we move to those. I have no problem with that. Well, we've got to have some methodology prior to voting on how we change the different levels.
I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that.
Thank you.
But I do think it's going to look much different once we get those DESI guidelines.
Oh, I don't disagree at all. But we're blind right now on how we're going to change until we tie something to it.
So, John, my understanding is what we vote on tonight is what we're telling the state we would do under each scenario. And then the one that we're recommending or the one that we want to start out in. But we're still nimble in terms of if we need to change something because of what John's talking about, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Does that make sense, John, or John Parks?
It makes sense. Right now we don't have anything that we're gonna set it to, so it makes it a lot harder to justify where we're at. This at least gives us justification. If the state, next week goes to a 2, that triggers us to remote except for the high need students. That gives us some guidance on where we're going to be.
Okay.
Until DESI comes out with whatever they're coming out with.
So, Aaron, did you have something? I'm sorry.
Yeah, just on the same idea. I'm just trying to get a handle on what DESI is going to send us, because I feel like it needs to be pretty crystal clear what the metrics are that would say, say we choose hybrid tonight, but what are the metrics that we need to go full remote? What are the metrics that we can start going more in person? Are you expecting that level of detail from DESI?
Yes.
Okay.
I honestly, they have not given us any information on what those metrics are. All they've said is they're going to give us that information next week. Now, if you use John's model, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, what you're saying, if phase 4 would be full in person. Phase 3.
Phase 4 could be a altered hybrid. It could be in person. Phase 3 would be hybrid only. Phase 2 would be remote except for high need students. Phase 1 is remote. I mean, that's when we're in the thick of things again and everything's falling apart. There's got to be some.
Those 4 phases are based on what the governor's been using, is what
Correct.
you're saying. Yeah.
So, John, how is it that the education commissioner isn't on the same page with the governor in terms of asking us to vote on something prior to them doing all of their work?
Because I don't think that's part of what you're supposed to be voting on, but it's fine. I mean, I have no problem making that part of the plan.
Okay.
The
Sean?
school committee's
Sorry.
role in this is to vote on the plans and the preferred model moving forward.
With it being nimble if we need to change something.
Right.
Sean?
Yeah, I think John Park's suggestion is sort of an interim, just call it a rule of thumb. I don't know if that has to be codified in the plan, but kind of as an interim rule of thumb for where we should be, that kind of thing is a reasonable one. John Doherty, is it your opinion or your belief that the DESI guidelines will be prescriptive?
Yeah.
In other words, what I say tonight is going to be fully subsumed by what DESI comes out with next week?
Yes, I think what my understanding is they're going to look at, I showed you a slide from John Hopkins. I think they're going to look at that type of data and they're going to use different metrics of that data.
And do you have any indication
looking
whether
at
that's going to be?
I think they're going to look at regional infection rates. I think they're going to look at, local infection rates, 7-day averages. I think that's the type of things that my guess is what they're looking at. I believe the governor is using about 6 or 7 different pieces of data in determining when he goes back and forth through phases.
So it is your expectation then that there's going to be, for lack of a better word, an exercise that each district has to go through to look at some combination of local, regional, state level metrics, or?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's my understanding. Yes.
Okay.
You good, Sean?
On this topic, yes.
Anyone else? Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to the conversation and the phase to remote versus hybrid, concept. The lack of guidelines was something I was a little concerned about as well as I was looking through it again and again and again. And this, I think we've all probably read through this thing probably 3 or 4 times at this point. And every time I read it, something else comes up in my head as I read through it. So I'm wondering, John, first of all, Dr. Doherty, first, I appreciate your willingness to consider something like that, especially considering we don't necessarily know what DSC is coming through. But I do think procedurally, if we're going to ask you to do so, we should vote and not just put it out there as 1 or 2 members of the committee asking so. So if that's the case, I have a drafted motion that we can work through, and then you can do whatever you need to from a paperwork perspective before the final filing. But I don't think it should just go with a discussion. It should actually be something we agree to vote on, yay or nay, just to close the loop appropriately and then move on to the next topic. So Chuck, if you're amenable to that, and Dr. Doherty, if you're amenable to that, I have a quick motion I just drafted, and then we can move forward from there with any amendments to it and vote on it appropriately. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to say it is this way. Move to add the conceptual idea of aligning state phases with hybrid, remote, in-person models as follows. Phase 4 is hybrid or in-person. Phase 3 is hybrid. Phase 2 is remote except high needs. Phase 1 is remote.
I'll second.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. Aaron?
Sorry, is this for discussion or voting on the motion?
We're still in discussion.
Okay, thanks. So I just want to be clear, even if we're using the language that I think you said phase 3 could be a hybrid, we're still going to allow families the choice to choose full remote, even if we as a district are in hybrid.
We always have to offer full remote.
Okay. It all year, essentially.
Yeah, until DESI says we don't have to anymore. Yes.
Okay. And then my question is, it still feels fuzzy to me how this process is going to be of moving through. So other than the state making a call, which may or may not be where Reading is at or where Middlesex County is at, what exactly will be our process after we vote tonight? What will be Reading's process for changing from whatever model we vote tonight to changing to a different model?
You're giving me the authority to do that tonight because the situation is fluid and changes. It's the plan of likely.
Okay, so you would get information based on the DESI metrics, and you would say, okay, we need to move one direction or the other because this metrics changed for our region.
Yes.
Okay.
You all
Thanks.
set, Aaron?
Yep.
Sean?
I guess I might just offer this as maybe a friendly amendment to Tom's motion, which is something along the lines of pending clear guidance from DESI on moving between models.
And I was going to just nod. I'm nodding over here. I don't know if the camera can see me, but I was going to add the same thing to my own amendment. So I accept that as a friendly amendment.
Thank you, Sean. Anyone else? Carla, you look like you're ready to say something. Carla,
You're muted.
you're on mute.
Sorry. With this motion, are we actually tying in the parameters? We're defining the phases, right? We're putting that into our document. Are we actually tying the phases into a series of, like, if we hit this platform with a number of cases, we're going into this next phase? Are we actually tying that back to rates of infection? And is that something, Dr. Doherty, that you're going to be making a decision on, or is this already going to be predetermined when we're going to move within these different phases, if we have to?
My understanding is that the guidance that we're getting next week will be clear parameters on when you move from one from one model to another.
Okay.
So as it is, Carla, sorry, Chuck, it's written to align to the state phases and
Sure.
really nothing else. So if the state changes its phase next week, if we vote on hybrid today and it goes back to phase 2 next week, we're essentially saying we agree that we're going to go back to remote with except high needs, right? Until DSC changes things. But there's no, from our perspective and from Dr. Doherty's perspective, this is not saying until the RT rate is something, until the infection rate is something, because those are all things that drive the phase of the state. But we are saying we're aligning ourselves to the state's phase.
So Chuck, may I ask another question? A follow-up?
Yes. Yeah, I was just getting rid of a dog here.
Do we have to align ourselves to the state? Are we giving something up by doing that?
I don't think we have to go.
No, I'm sorry. My question was aligning to the state for the phases or aligning to the state for the data from DESI, or both?
Do we in Reading have to align ourselves with us? I know if the governor says, okay, the rates are too high, everybody's got to go remote. Okay, but do we have to align ourselves with DESI and their guidelines? Or are we in Reading allowed to say, our rates in Reading are low, we are sticking with our current plan?
I think, Carla, what they're going to tell us is that whatever data points they're using, you look at your county, your community, that type of thing. So I think it's going to, and I think you may even see the governor do this. He may go to phase 2 in some counties and keep phase 3 for other counties, depending on what the infection rate is. Because my guess is that the numbers look much different in Western Mass than they do in Middlesex County and Suffolk County. So I think he may even go that route. So
I don't want to give up control to DESI if we can, in our town, keep control of how fluid we are and how nimble we are moving between different phases.
So just along those lines, John, you just used the term counties. So could it be further drilled down to towns, or would it have to be counties, do you think? Because, certain towns in the county may be acceptable versus, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do, Chuck. I wish I had better information for you. All I know is that we're going to get this information next week. I know Reading's numbers are very low.
Yeah.
But we have staff that don't live in Reading. They come from
Right.
all over. So I think that's something we have to keep in
Yeah.
mind.
Good point. Yeah.
So,
Sean?
Yeah, Carla, I hear your point about giving up control. I would suggest that this to me is really a backstop that sort of gives the community, all the stakeholders some assurances that we're not sort of going full steam ahead with one model, independent of what's happening around us, right? So, I mean, we could always, if for some reason what this policy or this motion suggests put us out of step with the state versus what we want to do, we could always rescind this piece and do something different as a committee. But as a backstop, as a signal sort of to the community that, while we wait for DESI to tell us sort of what the guidelines are, we're going to be thoughtful about how to move from one model to another. I see value in this.
Aaron?
I think this is a given, but I just feel the need to clarify it. If we have an outbreak in a school or an outbreak in our town, we would still be at liberty to close our schools, correct?
yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? Comments? Tom?
I guess I'll just one more thing as we potentially go to the vote here is, I love the idea of local control. I very much love the idea of local control, but I think as well, as we look around this, and yes, while Reading has, 3 active after-gift cases right now, only 3, it was 1 a week ago, but it's 3 now. We do have to consider, as Dr. Doherty pointed out, that our teachers come from around, right? And they have different rates at different places. I would think it's probably relatively safe to say that most of our staff are probably in the Middlesex and Suffolk County areas, maybe a little bit more in a few farther out places, but aligning to that concept, from my perspective, provides the guidelines, the boundaries, I think, as Sean laid out. So just getting us all, if we can agree to that, that's great. If we can't, no big deal. But I think it's a directional thing, and I think the community has asked in my conversations with some of them is, well, what does it mean? What's phase 1? What's phase 2? How do we know? What are the guidelines of which we're going to switch? Because that is one thing that is missing from the document, and I think, and maybe that's because it wasn't asked for from DSC, most likely, because we fill out the template. But I think this helps provide some guidelines that helps the greater community, not just our families, but our teachers and other staff that support the schools as well.
Okay, thank you. So I don't see any other committee member questions or comments. We do have several from the community. And so I think maybe we can each kind of take, there's several, take turns reading them. I'll go.
Hey, Chuck.
I'm sorry.
I think we were all just biting our tongue on the motion for now. I'm not sure that we're done with questions more broadly.
Yeah,
I would agree with that. That's why I raised same concept. So if you want to do.
Well, I mean, I'm not cutting off committee questions. I'm just saying that I don't see anyone raising right now. Until someone comes back with a question, we could get started on the community input.
Yeah, I think what Sean was trying to say, Chuck, is that we have an open motion that we should probably vote on, and then there might be other topics the committee wants to talk to. we can certainly start with reading public comment or comment
Well, I
that reads
think-
out to that.
I
The
think
open-
I think the public comment is relative to our vote. So I think that we should hear that before we make our final vote. I think that's, you know, I mean, reading the public comment after we voted on something kind of defeats the need or the weight of the public comment, if you know what, you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, but okay,
Just
so
vote on the motion?
yeah, this is the sub motion about the state phases that
amendment.
we're referring to.
We can vote on the amendment. Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize. So you want to vote on the amendment and we'll hold voting on the main motion.
Yes, sir. That's what we're
I'm
talking about.
sorry, Sean.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Okay, so is there any more comments on the amendment? Seeing none. Aaron, you didn't have a question, did you, on that? Okay.
No.
Carla,
Aye.
Tom,
Aye.
Sean,
Aye.
Aaron,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
and Chuck, aye. Okay, so now we'll go back to discussion on the main motion. Again, I apologize for that misunderstanding. So, so now I would like to start reviewing the public comment on that. And I went back to, I guess, the last one we received. The earliest one was from a Mike M. Does anybody, I think that's it, right?
Yep.
Does,
That's the one at 12:18 today. Is that the one you're referring to?
yeah.
I'll read that if you want me to.
Sure, thank you.
Okay. School committee and Superintendent Doherty, I ask that the content of this email is read during tonight's school committee meeting. During the evening of August 4th, 2020, Superintendent Doherty shared with the public a draft proposed plan for RPS reopening and explained that the plan will be voted on by the SC on August 6, 2020. The proposed plan explains that RPS reopening will include a phased-in hybrid model. The plan further explains that the phased-in hybrid method will result in various grade level students not receiving in-person, in-building class time until after the school year starts. In some instances, the amount of time between the school year start date and the first in-person classroom instruction is alarmingly delayed. Most notably, RMHS juniors and seniors will not see the inside of a school classroom until October 12, 2020, and freshmen and sophomores on October 5, 2020. Some of my concerns with the phased-in hybrid include the following. It is possible, perhaps even likely, that prior to the phase-in period expiring, RPS will experience a COVID exposure and resultantly have to transition to full remote. With that possibility in mind, RPS should get our children in school as soon as possible in order to maximize the amount of in-person school time. Postponing the first day students receive in-person classroom to the middle of October 2020 increases the likelihood they will receive little or no in-person class time during a COVID-related RPS shutdown. School for children has already been reduced by 10 days. In addition, every Friday is now scheduled to include only a half day of school for the children. Those facts precipitate a need to maximize the amount of time children receive in-person school in order to compensate for lost time. A phase-in is contrary to increasing in-person school time. Even under ideal circumstances, virtual learning at home is greatly inferior to in-person learning. A phase-in approach increases the detrimental time a child is negatively impacted by a reduction of in-person learning. School is a holistic endeavor with children in that more than academic instruction is shared with the children. More specifically, school is a place where children learn important social and emotional skills. Isolation at home created by additional remote learning increases student depression, anxiety, and negatively impacts development of social and emotional skills. Stakeholders, parents, SC, teachers, and staff have had less than 48 hours to consider the phased-in component and offer input. I appreciate the meetings and opportunities for feedback the superintendent has hosted during the recent weeks. The transparency and opportunity provided to families is appreciated and valued. However, I'm very disappointed that during none of those many Zoom meetings, emails, letters, etc., there was never any mention of a phased-in hybrid proposal until less than 48 hours before the SC is set to vote on the plan. Perhaps this lack of timely notification was unavoidable due to factors the public is not aware of. I do have questions. Will students at risk be allowed to avoid the phased-in component and report to in-person school on official first day of school and every school day week thereafter? If yes, what will their school day look like when they are in school during the week the remainder of their cohort is learning virtually from home? Why was the phased-in proposal never discussed in any of the information sessions with parents and stakeholders until less than 48 hours before the school committee will be asked to vote on it? What precipitated the introduction of a phase-in approach, phase-in concept? If there was an opportunity to disclose the possibility of a phased-in approach in earlier weeks, that would have provided more time for public, stakeholder, and SC consideration and feedback. With only 2 days remaining for the vote, I fear the SC will now be in the unfortunate position of having to make a rushed and insufficiently considered vote decision with minimal parent and stakeholder input. In closing, I ask the SC vote to not allow a phased-in approach and alternatively implement the hybrid method without a phase-in. I strongly prefer the students attend school full-time and in person, but I recognize that a hybrid method is likely the only choice available. I think it's important to keep in mind that of the 86% of surveyed families in Reading would be willing to have their students attend school in person. Yet there appears to be no serious consideration provided that option. Respectfully submitted, Michael Monahan, Bancroft Avenue, Reading, Massachusetts.
Okay, there were some questions in there. There was the first, I get the second one. What was the first one again, Tom?
Will students at risk be allowed to avoid the phased-in component and report to in-person school on the official first day of school and every school day week thereafter? If yes, what will their school day look like when they're in school during the week the remainder of their cohort is learning virtually from home?
John, can you?
Yeah, so yes, they are, unless, I mean, we did talk about different phases tonight. So if it's phase 2, they would still be coming into school and they would be working with staff. It depends. If it's a special education student, it's part of the special education program, they would be getting the services that are required in their IEP. If they're attached to a specific cohort, then they would be working with those teachers either in person or remote, getting the extra support that they need.
Okay, thank you. So on the second, I can answer this. I think the second question was about the timeliness of the phase presentation.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah, so I think that the way I would answer that is we had a pretty robust discussion on the 4th, and the phased option kind of emanated from that with some comments that were made. Is that accurate, John?
Yes, but as I mentioned, yes, that's part of it. But as I mentioned in my presentation tonight, there's a lot of factors that are going into proposing the phased in. And these are things that have been emerging over the last week. Because information's been coming fast and furious at us, it became very apparent to me as the week went on that there was no way, from a variety of reasons, that we would be able to start on September 15th full model, full hybrid. One of them being staffing. I do want to say something, is that one of the things that the community has appreciated is the amount of transparency and availability we have had and information that we've been giving. Sometimes that comes with a downside because you give out the information, but the information keeps changing so that we don't have an opportunity to keep the community informed as timely as they want to. So, we did everything we could to keep the community informed, get the feedback we needed. But what DESE asked us for last week is much different than what DESE asked us for next week. We were asked to do 3 preliminary plans, very small amount of information. That's why we didn't talk about a phase-in approach.
Okay. The next email that I pulled up was from Stanton. Carla, I'm just looking at my screen and going across. Carla, you want to read that one? Or
I have one before that from Kristen Doucette. Peter and Kristen or Doucette.
Yeah, Kristen Hoppy Doucette, I have the same.
I didn't see. Okay, go ahead. Can you read
that? Sure. Good afternoon. This email is to request a delay in voting on the plan, which now includes a phased-in approach. Parents were provided a multitude of opportunities to provide feedback and asked questions about the plan, which was appreciated. However, the phased-in approach was not part of the plan at that point, nor were the individual schedules for a hybrid model. First, September is one of the most temperate months the entire year here in Mass. To lose the entire month for outside classes, outdoor lunch, and PE band chorus makes no sense. Many of the private schools are starting early to take advantage of the good weather. Next, at least in the middle school, Friday appears to be a day with almost no learning and is dedicated to homework. There is one asynchronous advisory meeting listed. In addition, the synchronous learning at home weeks is the only 2 hours and 40 minutes per day with none in the afternoon. Finally, there is no indication of how much of the curriculum can or will be covered in a hybrid and or fully remote model, nor how student learning will be assessed within and between these models. I believe there should be an opportunity for the community to review this new plan, provide feedback, and have questions answered prior to the school committee vote. Thank you, Peter and Kristen Doucette.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Aaron?
Chuck, before we go to the next one, can I ask a question?
Sure.
As far as these emails, I thought we were supposed to be looking for just the ones that say public comment. Am I wrong in that, or?
Well, I mean,
because I know some of these were put into the packet and sent out.
not the ones we're reading.
Okay, that's what I wanted to verify.
So, you know, I mean, if someone forgot to put public comment on there, I'm not going to not read it. I mean, these are different times. I mean, normally these people would, these residents would be at our meeting and would stand up and speak. I think this is the, you know, the best way to handle it.
Yeah, that's
so,
I just wanted to verify.
Yeah.
Chuck, can I comment on the comment?
Sure.
Okay, because I think there needs to be some clarification about some of the things that were said. So, and I said this today in the community forum, and rightfully so. I think people have an impression of synchronous learning and asynchronous learning as to what happened last spring. That clearly will not be the case. What the high school schedule looks like is the same, whether it's in person or it's remote. And the learning, the teaching and learning that's going on in the high school in the remote model is all synchronous. And I think that's an important point, that whether the students are in person and are phased in, are in person or they're phased in, they're getting strong teaching and learning happening remotely. Now, I know it's not in person. However, it's not what was in the spring. So I think that's important. The second piece is the middle school schedule. So the middle school schedule, when it's remote of the hybrid, don't forget, they don't get specials the remote week. The specials are being done during the in-person week only. That is automatically going to make the day shorter. So the way the middle school schedule's been set up is all the core subjects are in the morning and they're synchronous. The afternoon is what normally would have happened in person for the teachers. Their common planning time, their prep periods, meeting times, things like that. So the reason why the day is shorter is because there's no art, music, PE, or any of those classes happening. It's just the 5 core subjects.
Thank you. Tom?
First of all, very much appreciate that feedback and that update there, John. It is good to add that clarity and enunciate it and make it clear. I think the one question I keep getting, and it is raised in this email, and we didn't just address it, is Fridays for the middle school. There is, as far as I understand it, and as far as it's written right now, there is no synchronous learning on Fridays for the middle school at the current time. And that, I think, is one of the questions people are raising, that I think it makes sense to help us understand the why of that part, and if there's anything we can do to amend it. I know that the principals have been working hard on this, and I'm sure there are other limitations that are driving that. Maybe if we can enunciate those limitations and or understand if there can be some core subject coverage on Friday morning, since it's theoretically supposed to be a half day of synchronous learning. If there's something we can do there, that would help assuage some of the concerns of the middle school parents, at least.
John, did you?
I'm looking at the schedule. I could certainly talk to the middle school principals about that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, if it's possible, that would be something I think a lot of teachers.
I can talk to them about it. I can talk to them about it.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Carla?
I appreciate the question, Tom. I feel like in some respects that piece of it is kind of getting into the operations side of it. I look at it personally for me, and I'd rather see core subjects in person. If we could do that. So I kind of like that idea, but I feel like we're kind of getting into the operations piece of it a little bit with that. Clarification would be nice, but if we don't have it, it's completely understandable at the moment.
Thank you for that, Carla. Okay, the next email, Aaron, you're up. Stanton.
Okay. Dr. Doherty and members of RPS School Committee, I'm writing this email to convey my thoughts about the school's reopening plans in advance of tonight's meeting. I'm sure this is one of many emails you have received on the topic, but I would appreciate you taking the time to hear me out before the vote this evening. My daughter Mia will be entering 3rd grade at Killam this year, and I'm strongly in favor of a full in-person return to school this fall. I'm beyond frustrated and disappointed over the unwillingness of teachers, both locally and statewide, to accommodate an in-person learning experience for students. I consider in-person education to be an essential service and should be prioritized above all other reopenings we've enjoyed across the state this summer, including retail, gyms, restaurants, and personal services. If I can get my hair cut and work out inside of a gym without a face covering, our children should be able to attend school with proper safety precautions in place, like social distancing and masks. In fact, Mia has been enjoying summer camp for the last 6 weeks, safely and without incident. In addition, my 4-year-old son returned to his child care center at the beginning of July, safely and without incident. It's unclear to me why we can't seem to be able to adopt similar plans for our public schools, which greatly exceeds camp and daycare in terms of importance and development. Over the last week or so, I've tried to wrap my head around this hybrid model and get comfortable with what this means for Mia's education and for our household with 2 full-time working parents. I've tried to be positive and have come to the conclusion that any in-person learning is better than none at all. And so I've tried to move on from my hopes that Mia would return to a full in-person model. However, I once again find myself incredibly frustrated with the phased-in hybrid approach that is now being proposed. I find it especially concerning at the elementary school levels, where children so desperately need in-person support from adults and the camaraderie of their peers to be able to successfully learn. At this age, the students are still learning how to learn, and I am strongly opposed to this phased-in approach. I also worry that if any instances of COVID occur, even within another district, that the school will go fully remote before she ever even has a chance to walk through the doors at Killam. That said, after the healthy experience we have had this summer in our household with daycare and camp, I'm really encouraged that with proper mask wearing and safety precautions, that we can keep our school community healthy and in hybrid mode, if not back to full in-person at some point this year. I have also personally witnessed how important it is for children to have exposure to adults and kids outside of their immediate household, and it makes such a tremendous difference on their social emotional learning, which is something that I feel has been removed from the recent conversation as MTA has pushed back on in-person and hybrid plans. There is absolutely no substitute for this and something that we will be unable to accomplish through remote learning. I also want to thank you for the time you've taken these last several months to work through the logistics of reopening and get the input of different stakeholders. My husband is the Director of Finance and Operations in another school district, and I have witnessed firsthand the amount of work that this all entails. I truly appreciate it. In closing, I implore you to reconsider the phased-in hybrid model and bring the students back in a hybrid model beginning on September 15th when school reopens. If it has to be hybrid, please let's get started with some in-person learning that week to give our students the best shot at a successful year. Thank you for your time. Laura Stanton, 16 Francis Drive.
Thank you. Sean?
Sure. Is this Sue P? Is that what everybody has as the next one?
Yes.
Dear school committee members, I wanted to write to express my concern about the phased reopening at the high school. With the rising senior, I am very disappointed to see that the juniors and seniors are not heading back in person until the 5th week, October 12th. I know some of you were on the superintendent's forum last night and heard other high school parents voice similar concerns. Waiting to see how things go at the other schools isn't necessarily going to translate to the logistics at the high school. Our high school kids deserve every right to be in a classroom. I am questioning what staff are going to be in the satellite rooms. At best, my son may have one live in-person instruction day out of 10 for a given class due to the block schedule. Not overly pleased with that thought, but I realize there is only so much that can be done from a scheduling standpoint. My son did not receive much instruction last spring. What is the process for parents to raise concerns if the remote learning is not more rigorous this year as has been promised? Hopefully this will not be an issue, but I believe we are going to end up remote sooner rather than later. Thus, another reason to get the kids in person as soon as possible. Thank you for all the time you are putting in. Sincerely, I'll apologize in advance, Sue Proputnowitz.
John, did you
Yeah,
just want to?
I can respond to that. So, like it would be if it was in person, if there were concerns in the classroom, then the first person that a parent should talk to is the teacher. If there isn't, if it hasn't been resolved, then you would go to the department chair, then to the assistant principal, and then to the principal. And then to me, if all those don't work out.
Thank you. John, did you want to read the next one from Michael Radney?
Yep. I write this letter to raise concern about the hybrid plan to start the school year. A remote start is necessary until public health benchmarks are met and an assessment of the building shows they are safe. We continue to strongly advocate for the Reading's plan should be phased in model tied to specific benchmarks and not just a calendar. At this point, I do not believe all safety measures have been have been worked out, and I do not feel comfortably safe entering the school with students. Thanks, Michael Radford, our teacher, RMHS.
Thank you. And I will read the next one from Raymond Albright. I, like all teachers, understand the complexity of this issue for you. The response to the pandemic in our country has been inexcusably bad, and we are left with awful choices. I want to go back to school the way it was before. Unfortunately, we can't do that. And we shouldn't go back to school right now because until this disease is under control, it won't be safe. For starters, the disease is airborne in an environment like schools. And that is going to create a situation where the presence of so many people, even with masks, They aren't medical grade in parentheses, and distancing airborne in the context makes that not relevant as in an outside environment. Will continually lead to outbreaks, putting our students, staff, and families in danger, as well as creating an environment for greater community spread. The disease is not just about death. Frequently, people talk about the death rate in the young, but morbidity is also a problem. The original SARS has left many who survived it with long-term problems, and there's an emerging possibility that there is a myriad of long-term problems from having this disease, from cognitive function reduction to heart damage to lung damage, and these problems are being observed in asymptomatic and non-serious infected individuals at a frighteningly high rates. I'm concerned about becoming infected and dying, but I'm also concerned about myself, my family, my students, my students' families, all suffering long-term effects, even years down the road. Finally, I think we have a responsibility to remember, even as well as mass is doing, we still have too many infections. And he submitted a diagram, which everyone saw, shows a clearly increasing trend in infections. Our rate of infection above 1, which is an indication of potential exponential growth in infections, again, another diagram, and the percent positive has been steadily increasing, an indicator that we are beginning to test only the sickest and missing the true level of infection in the community. And another diagram. Many will state, but Reading's numbers are low, except that staff come from all over New England area, and teachers and students and families work and travel in many locations throughout. The state is an ecosystem, not a bubble. Ultimately, we are part of the overall mass community, and the opening of schools around the state will increase the potential for rapidly rising community infections. And there is evidence and opinions from the experts that opening of schools will increase our community infection and put us all in danger. And he says, see Israel, Hong Kong, and South Korea, just as a few examples. Finally, I won't deny I'm worried. The guidance put out from the state was based on cherry-picked science, and since then, more science has made the assertions that children don't transmit the virus at high rates is absurd. All the safety guidance we are following ignores the reality of how children behave, how they learn, and underscores a true lack of understanding of how real education goes on in schools. We are setting ourselves up as a community up for a difficult, unpleasant experience that requires us to be lucky to avoid the disaster scenario we all fear. I encourage you at this stage of the global pandemic, which our country has failed to handle appropriately, we must do our best with remote learning, because the consequence otherwise will be far worse than anything we hope to gain by this dystopian version of in-person education. Raymond E. Albright. Okay, I picked that one. Tom Corey.
Okay. Dear school committee, I want to thank you and the RPS district administration for all the work you have dedicated over the last weeks and months to putting together a comprehensive plan for a return to school this fall. I appreciate the opportunities we've had to express our thoughts and concerns throughout the process, and I have one question that remains that feels like the real sticking point for me in return to school in the buildings. Please provide the detailed health/science benchmarks, rate of transmission, and overall positive rate that would need to be in place for the following to occur. For students and teachers to return to the building on September 15th. For phases to either move forward on the schedule that has been proposed in the detailed plan, or to pause this moving forward and to stay where we are. For the district to decide to move backwards, send students and teachers home for a period of remote teaching and learning. This would be similar to the approach that the state has been taking with regard to the phases of reopening, and that certain levels of the rate of transmission and overall positive rate would need to be achieved and maintained for us to keep moving ahead. I want to go back to school and see my students very much, but I also need to know that we have a clear plan to make sure that we're all safe. Thank you for taking the time to read this, and I look forward to your response. Warmly, Anne Marie Corey, Special Education Teacher, Reading Memorial High School, Reading, Mass.
John, did you have anything on that?
No,
I think
I
we
don't.
covered that. Okay,
Do the next one.
Rouchy.
Yep. To the school committee, hello, I'm writing to express my support for a remote start to the school year. As an elementary music specialist at 2 schools, Joshua Eaton and Barrows, last year I saw approximately 650 children every week. If the Reading schools use the hybrid model to start the 2020-21 school year, I will be coming into contact with that many children over each a 2-week period. That, to me, is a frightening prospect. It undermines the safe bubbles that are intended for the classrooms by making me a carrier between them, threatening the safety of hundreds of children and their teachers. And it jeopardizes the safety of myself and my family as well. Conversely, the remote start model, although not ideal, is safe. I believe that we should return to the classroom this year, but only when it has been proven safe to do so. Thank you, Elena Rauchi, music specialist.
Thank you. Aaron, this is Pellage.
Good afternoon, Reading School Committee members. I'd be remiss if I didn't begin by saying thank you to all stakeholders involved in working this summer, likely far more than ever before, with anxiety and stress levels higher than ever before. As a teacher in another district, I know the extent that all of you have put into these plans together, and I thank you sincerely for that. My main focus is on the reopening plan. While I realize there is no good plan right now, I do want to say I appreciate the phased-in approach with the remote option, as we've seen other phased-in openings in other facets of society that are far smaller than our schools, example restaurants, and gatherings are showing upticks in our positivity rate. This will give the schools an opportunity to work out new processes and protocols that have had to come to be because of COVID. I know there's a push based on the Q&A session that I sat in on and what I have seen posted on social media to have all kids go back into school ASAP. While as a teacher, I would want that to happen too, I realize perhaps more than non-teaching parents that school will not be the same in person now as it has been in the past. Many of the social benefits of school will not be the same as they have been before, and the academic benefits in this new reality are TBD. There will be no small group.
Problematic. Our schools simply do not have adequate numbers of staff to implement this model. Hiring right now will not ensure that we have the needed staff or the quality of candidates needed to fill the roles necessary to make this model feasible. Specialists, special education, and paraprofessionals will all be in the building with both cohorts. This is nothing more than super spreading if we were to have a positive case. The requirements that our youngest elementary kids will have to follow will cause more trauma to them because they simply will not be able to follow the rules. Precious time is being wasted from focusing on a robust, thoughtful remote experience by principals trying to move schedules and create learning pods requested by families. Additional time on learning will be wasted if we have to switch from hybrid to remote, causing further complications for working parents. Remote learning is a stable and sustainable option that parents can rely on, even if it is difficult for them. Learning will be continuous and not interrupted. An elementary class that suddenly needs to quarantine has lost learning. Young kids will be too nervous and scared to go from the classroom one day to remote for 2 weeks because of exposure. They will not learn. Hybrid does not address the concerns regarding safe ventilation in buildings, whether there are 10 kids in a room or 25. One positive person will infect many others if the lack of ventilation is not remediated. I realize this decision is difficult. The only decision that will get kids learning and keep them learning that is sustainable with the staff we have in place and will keep everyone safe is to vote on a remote learning option. Thank you for your time, Julie Gilchrist.
Thank you, Sean. John, Did you want to take Mr. Spinelli's?
Yes, I will. Dear members of the school committee, I want to correspondence by acknowledging the Herculean task that has been asked of Dr. Doherty, his leadership team, and the committee members. There are no easy answers. I emphasize with all stakeholders' desires to return to normal. However, the current dialogue at the town, state, and national level is about re-entry into school, which is drastically different than a resumption of learning. I commend Dr. Doherty's decision to adopt a phased-in approach as an initial step, but in order for the phased-in approach to prioritize safety and equity for the students and teachers, these phases must be phased on public health benchmarks and not specific dates. In addition, until we can equitably and appropriately staff each building, rushing to re-enter school would have harmful effect on the resumption of learning as well as student and teachers' well-being. 5 of the 6 members of this committee are parents of students that I have had the privilege of teaching over my 10 years at Parker. So you know what I am about. You know how much I value collaborating with my students to create an engaging classroom community. You know that I prioritize building relationships with my students and making a space for them to build relationships with each other. You know I love my job. I can tell you how much I wish this fall would be just like the past 10. How much I want to welcome my current students and start the year-long journey together. I can't even begin to describe how much I missed my 7th grade last spring and how much it hurt to settle for a drive-by graduation to say goodbye to my 8th graders. But the narrative that getting rushing kids back into brick and mortar buildings is what is best for them presents a logical fallacy. They are not returning to the same environment that they left in March. It is important for me to acknowledge that based on the logistics under the current plan, I personally do feel safe to return to school. However, I am a 33-year-old man in relatively good health. In addition, I teach on a team in the middle school level, which means I would only be in the building 4 out of every 10 days and only exposed to approximately 80 students. I am one of the lucky ones. But one of the reasons that I love my job so much is because my colleagues, many of whom have become a second family. So this afternoon, I am also writing for the members of my second family who aren't as lucky. For those who will be in almost every day, for those who must decide between retiring or putting themselves at risk of contracting a virus we still don't really understand. For those in some building across the district who may be exposed to 200 plus students every 2 weeks. I urge the administration and school committee to revise the current plan to include clear benchmarks that facilitate a clear, data-driven decision. Then and only then can we shift the conversation to a meaningful resumption of learning that values equity and safety for our stakeholders. Thank you for your time and consideration. Sincerely, Andrew Spinelli.
Thank you. The next email we got was from Ms. Scanlon, and it attached a memo from Commissioner Riley regarding a waiver, and she asked, will the superintendent be submitting this waiver?
If we need to, we will. That waiver is for the time and learning requirements, and the purpose of that is to ask for a reduction based on knowing that there's going to be time that's going to have to be dedicated to things like mask breaks, staggered arrival and dismissal times, things like that. So I know we have till August 14th to do that. So if we need to, we will.
Okay, thank you. Tom, the next one I had was
Denise.
Yes.
Iozzo?
Yes.
Hoping I pronounced that correctly as well. Good evening. As a 21-year employee of the RPS, as a general education paraeducator and a member of the Reading Paraeducators Union, I support the statement from the Reading Teachers Association. When it's safe to hold public meetings in person, open our public library and public buildings, town hall and police station, maybe it will be safe to send our students to school safely. Denise Iozzo, Reading resident of 34 years, town meeting member precinct 2, proud member of J.W. Killam Elementary School.
Okay, thank you. The next one will be from Ms. Simon.
No,
Lauren
Bennett.
Bennett?
That's not, that, we'll take that one up after this, that's not regarding, I don't think, it says marching band. I thought it was, that's not an agenda item.
It's related, Chuck, to the.
Oh, I apologize. I read just the caption. Okay, go ahead, Carla.
Dear Dr. Doherty, in the event that we are fully remote, please consider allowing extracurricular activities to continue. Marching band itself is inherently socially distant, and with some tweaking by Mr. Mulligan and the staff, it can be done safely. As you know, this has been so difficult on the kids' social emotional well-being, and having one thing to look forward to could make a world of difference. Please try to preserve any amount of normalcy you can for the students. They need it right now. Thank you, Lauren Bennett.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Aaron, one from Maria Simon.
Not Susie Carroll.
Carol. Chuck, maybe you only got.
I had her on the list. I just saw her. Yeah, you can read Susie Carroll. That's fine. I just wasn't.
That's what comes up next for me. Hello.
Shouldn't we keep them on until the building closes at night? Thanks, Connie, science teacher, grade 6 at Parker. And that's from Connie Quackenbush, to be clear.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you want me to answer them?
Sure.
So the first one isn't a boiler issue. It's the heating coils that are in the individual univents, because you can't heat them too much or you'll actually damage the univentilators. So it's going to have to be a balance of each univentilator to see what you can do. And if you put in too much cold air, it actually freezes the coils. And yes, I know way too much about this now. The hours of operation would be when there's people in the building. So that would include the amount of time that there are individuals in the building.
Okay, thank you. John, did you want to read the one from Amy?
Sure. Chuck, before I do that, can I ask a question? Back up
Sure.
a little bit in regards to marching band extracurriculars.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Sorry, I did have my hand raised.
I just see it now. I apologize.
No worries. I know we have specific guidelines as far as distancing for chorus, band, things like that. We're expecting additional releases from MIAA. I think it's next Friday, John?
DESI next Friday.
Okay. MIAA is coming out soon after that, I believe, if I remember correctly.
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay. A question I'm getting a lot is, if we go into full remote, but MIAA has said sports can take place, certain sports can take place, is that something we're going to follow?
I don't think I can answer that question right now, John, honestly, because if we're fully remote, I guess the question would be, why are we fully remote?
Mm-hmm.
Because if we're fully remote because the medical data says that, then I'm not sure it's safe to be having any extracurricular activities. Because if they can't come to school, then how can they be doing extracurricular?
I just wanted to clarify that because it's a question I've gotten several times this week.
Yeah, I think it would depend on why we're fully remote.
Thank you.
I know that answer is not a great answer. I just don't know how else to answer it right now.
Aaron?
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, if we were hybrid, but we have students who choose full remote and athletics and extracurriculars are happening, can the students come to school if they wish for athletics and extracurriculars?
I honestly don't want to answer that right now, Aaron, because I think that's a pretty complicated question.
Okay.
I think it would come down to why are they fully remote then?
Well, we're saying that families don't have to give a reason and families can make that
No,
choice
but
themselves.
if it's health reasons, I think we just, that's something that I would have to do further investigation on.
Okay, so case by case basis?
No, I don't even want to say that because the
Okay.
commissioner came out the other day and basically said that if a district or families are choosing to go fully remote, then we would need to reconsider if they're going to be able to participate in extracurricular. So that's why I'm hesitating.
Okay. Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you, Aaron. John, did you want to read that one from Amy?
Sure. Dear School Committee, a question about the reopening plan. Why will the high school students be remote and the school be empty until October? I would like my children to receive in-person instruction before October 5th and 12th. Thank you, Amy Yatsuhashi.
Okay, I think that question was addressed in the presentation. Did you have any more to say about it, John? Or?
No, again, I think it's going to be, the high school schedule is going to be the most complicated one to put together once we have the data and information on who's going to be remote and what staff are going to be remote. And so we only have 3 weeks until school starts. And so my concern is filling vacant positions and creating schedules. I don't see how it can be done. So that, as well as all of the other pieces that we referred to earlier.
Okay, thank you. I'll read the one from Megan Caffrey. Dear school committee members, my name is Megan Caffrey. I am a Reading resident as well as a special education teacher at Killam. I encourage the school committee to read through and discuss the statement released today by the Reading Teachers Association before voting on the plans. I believe everybody saw that, and it was in the packet tonight as well. I don't know whether I don't have the full packet in front of me. I can read it. I just don't have it in front of me. Does anyone have that in front of them?
Yeah, I do, Chuck.
Do you mind reading it, Tom?
No, I don't mind at all. I do have a question to go back to once we're done with this, though, just to, we can come back to it as later, that's fine. Dear Reading School Community, we are speaking out publicly to clearly state our position and reasoning with regards to opening school in September. The Reading Teachers Association is made up of almost 400 teachers and nurses who work in Reading Public Schools. Some of our members live right here in Reading, while others live in neighboring communities. Many of our members are parents with children who attend public school here and across the region. Throughout the spring and summer, our members have been speaking up about concerns and asking questions. Like everyone else, our understanding of COVID-19 has changed and evolved as the scientific and medical community has learned more about the virus. Although some of our concerns are being heard, we don't feel as though the guidelines and resources provided are enough to keep everyone safe. Teachers in Reading miss our students and are eager to resume learning in person. Classroom learning is how education is supposed to be. We know that this spring's crisis learning was not ideal for our students and their families. It was not how anyone wanted to finish the school year. We pride ourselves on our ability to build personal relationships with our students. Our greatest collective obligations, however, are to keep students, educators, families, and communities out of harm's way and to prevent a resurgence of COVID-19 in our community. We want everyone who starts school on the first day to be there on the last day. The hybrid model, which is currently proposed by the district, is not a return to school in the traditional sense that we know it. Children as young as 5 years old will be asked to sit in desks spaced 6 feet apart from their peers and teachers. They will not be able to hug their teachers when they are sad, high-five a classmate when they persevere through a challenging math equation, play tag at recess, or sit together to collaborate in small groups to share their thinking with others. Students will spend much of their in-person learning looking at a screen while their teacher broadcasts from a nearby classroom. Teachers will spend instructional time reviewing protocols, reminding students about about mask safety, ensuring proper distancing, and allowing for hand washing and mask breaks. With other educators throughout our region, we have called for a phased-in start to school year where students begin with a comprehensive remote learning experience and then transition to the hybrid model only when public health data indicates that it can be done safely. The benchmarks for transitioning from one phase to the next should be based on clear public health and safety metrics. These metrics should include factors such as positive test rates in Massachusetts, availability of test results, and a low rate of transmission for our region. Teachers have advocated for a comprehensive evaluation of our school's HVAC systems by experts who understand the science behind the airborne spread of infectious diseases, such as COVID-19, with results shared publicly. We are concerned about classrooms without sufficient windows. We are concerned that a hybrid plan puts special education and specialist teachers at greater risk than other teachers because they would teach in person every week. We want to ensure there are ample substitute teachers and nurses to provide coverage for those who may be sick or need to quarantine. We want to know that adequate staffing will allow teachers who are at high risk to take necessary leaves. COVID-19 has severely disrupted our world and made it harder for many parents to work. Many teachers face the same dilemma of how to work and supervise kids at home while remote learning. People have asked, if we don't go back now, when will we go back? Our answer is when it is safe. When COVID-19 cases are declining in Massachusetts. When the rate of transmission is below 1%. When our building's HVAC systems undergo evaluations that deem them safe. When Reading has an effective contact tracing protocol in place. When the community has access to rapid testing with timely results. When our schools have the staffing and resources to meet the needs of our students without compromising safety. When the in-person experience of students isn't so isolating or scary. Until then, it is safer and less restrictive for students to begin with remote learning. Any plan that does not address the inequities of risk exposure and safety concerns does not have the best interest of students and teachers in mind. Finally, to our families, you know us. We are the educators of your children. You know the passion we have for working with your children, so you also know how hard it is for us to think about beginning school without seeing them walk through the door. Our hearts want nothing more than to be back in the schools, setting up our classrooms just like we were a year ago. However, our head knows that we can't do that right now. As educators, we always tell our students one of our most important jobs is to keep them safe, in all manners of the word. Never has that sentiment been more real than it is now. Reading Teachers Association, Eric Goldstein, Social Studies, Grade 6, Parker Middle School.
Thank you, Tom. Does anyone wish to comment on that?
I'll take a stab.
Okay.
There's a lot in there, obviously. I think I'll speak for myself and everybody can say yes or no, but I think we empathize with the teachers, we empathize with the families. There's a lot that goes into this discussion. There's a lot that goes into this discussion and this decision. It's not an easy discussion, it's not an easy decision. As I look through that, I think some of our conversation today has answered some of those things. We've already earlier today amended some of our own internal guidance essentially to say we're going to follow the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4 functionality as it is. We know at the current time the rate of transmission is not below 1%. It's 1.06. It's gone very slightly uptick over the last month, 1.05, 1.06. There's a lot here. I think we've already answered the HVAC stuff. I think it ultimately comes down to, in that regard, do we trust our facilities department? And I do think we have one of the best facilities department and some of the best taken care of schools that I've seen around in a long time. I think we do a great job there personally. Contact tracing I have a problem with from my perspective in terms of, is it the school responsibility or is it Board of Health and our nurses have worked closely with the Board of Health. So I'd like to hear more about that, but I don't know that it's something we can say yes or no to. I don't know that that's a school obligation. I'd like to hear more if somebody has an input into that. Some of the other ones I think are challenging, are more challenging to hit. When the in-person experience for students isn't so isolating or scary, that essentially means we're waiting until a vaccine. And I don't know that, from my perspective, I don't know that's tenable. And I do think, though, that children are very resilient. We've talked about it. We've seen it in many cases. Kids want to get together. They understand. They will understand. They do understand the 6 foot, the 3 foot. They've all been out hanging out with each other over the summer as well. I think there's a difference between internal versus external. And I think that's one thing we have to acknowledge as we go through this as well. And one thing parents need to acknowledge as we go through this as well. Internal, obviously, you have a higher viral load factor that hits into those things, which is where some of these protocols come into place, where HVAC comes into place, versus external. When you're at a camp or you're playing a baseball game, you don't have that same viral load factor. Ultimately, we're weighing a bunch, as we said last week, a bunch of bad options. And hoping for the best of one. I know there's been a ton of work done on our remote learning platforms and abilities. I know that there's a lot of nervousness from the teachers. From the teachers of being in person, a lot of nervousness from the families of being remote. And I think we probably should address a little bit more tonight about the specialists and the special education and their exposure, because that's come up a few times. I know, Dr. Doherty, you've been trying to think through some things on those fronts to address some of those concerns. Some of these I think are reasonable requests. Some of them I don't know that we can realistically accommodate, but we've tried to address them by following through with the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4 approach that John recommended early in the meeting. So I think we're trying to be accommodating and work through it, but I don't know that there's ever any perfect solution that's going to achieve anything here.
Thank you, Tom. Anyone else?
So, Chuck, I did have my hand raised, sorry. Tom, I actually reached out to somebody in regards to contact tracing today. That is a town obligation. The problem is that reports go to the town the person lives in. So if we have teachers that are outside of Reading, those towns don't have an obligation to report to Reading that somebody tested positive. They can do mutual, and I think it's been very cordial to do that, but it's not a mandatory option. I had the same question come to me, and that's why I asked. I think upfront, yes, we need to know that the contact tracing is available. It is through the town. That's not something the schools do. That is the town's job. As far as the other worries, I walked through today and I saw those schools. I saw the 2 classrooms in the high school, 2 classrooms at Coolidge, and then I saw the kitchen set up and the nurses set up in Birch Meadow. Things are tight. At the 6 foot level, they're going to have specific areas where they can walk, they can't walk. They're going to have directions to walk, which hallways they can use going each way. It is not anything that is going to be like a school we left in pre-March. And I think people do need to understand that. Kids being kids, we're going to have to deal with issues of taking off masks. We're going to have to deal with issues. And I know MASC just sent us a policy that we're going to have to bring up at some point. We're going to have to deal with issues of teachers correcting students until they understand social distancing in the classroom, that 6 foot length or that 3 foot length, whatever we're at. So we've got adjustment times we've got to deal with. Some of it worries me. Some of it, I think our teaching staff is incredibly professional and is going to do a great job with. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Carla, did you want to get the next one from
Sure.
Iannucci?
So, yeah, it's from Lauren Iannacci.
And not,
Yep, dear school committee, I'm writing to you tonight to beg you to consider a remote start to the school year. A remote start would give us adequate time to ensure the air quality and HVAC systems in every building are safe and provide the correct filtration to decrease the aerosolized spread of COVID-19. A remote start would also allow us to tie our reopening to public health metrics. Since we began planning in earnest in June, as much has changed about our knowledge of how children spread and contract the virus. At that time, our test positivity rate and our rate of transmissions were far lower than they are today. Numbers have slowly been creeping up, and we need to listen to the science and protect the students and staff of the Reading Public Schools. I ask you, how many student deaths would be too many? How many staff deaths would be too many? COVID does not discriminate. It could take any one of us. It could be your family member, your friend, your child's teacher. Children are dying, adults healthy, and those with pre-existing conditions are dying. I, for one, cannot stomach the idea of one of my students, their family members, my colleagues, my own family, or myself contracting the virus and becoming seriously ill, suffering long-term consequences, or dying because we are too eager to return to normal. I want so badly for this to be normal for our students. I want for my own kids too, but it is not. Knowing we could be forced into a dangerous situation has literally cost me countless nights of sleep. I am scared, I am struggling, and I am not alone. I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old at home. I continue to ask myself what will happen to them if I contract COVID and die. It brings me to tears to even imagine the scenario where I bring the virus home to my family. I want to work, I want to teach, I take my responsibility for my students' safety extremely seriously. This is simply not safe, and I'm terrified for all of us. All of our administrators have been working tirelessly to try to make school reopening safe, and their efforts are so appreciated. We're trying so hard to get back to normal, but we have to face the realities of our current situation. If we open schools without ensuring safe buildings and improved health metrics, it will not be and if people get sick, it will be when. So again, I ask you, how many deaths do you find acceptable? For me, the answer is 0. Thank you for your time and your dedication to the students of Reading. Sincerely, Lauren Iannacci, 6th grade social studies, Parker Middle School.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Aaron, I don't know who the next one was, I had was Perry.
I think now we're finally up to Maria.
I have
Maria
Maria
Simon.
Simon.
Maria Simon.
Oh, okay. Maria,
Hi there. I'm writing to implore you to begin school remotely and to phase into in-person teaching as health benchmarks are met. As so many employers have moved to remote, it feels as though our district thinks being in physical school is more important than our shared health. People are dying, and we are fighting for the safety of our students and of ourselves. Although I would like nothing more than to be able to move into my latest classroom and really be with my new batch of students, I do not feel it's best for them or for us. The distractions, fear, and discomfort of mask wearing and staying away from each other will impact learning much more than we know. Please help us do our best and safest teaching under these hopefully once-in-a-lifetime conditions. Many thanks for all you do and for your consideration, Maria Simon.
thank you. Sean,
Good evening. In one meeting, a teacher said that her town school system made pictures of what the classroom and the cafeteria would look like in detail so parents could decide about remote. John said that wouldn't be possible. Instead of that, could you please describe it? It might be helpful to include setup, movement, time in seats without moving, use of materials, etc. in the description. Thank you, Connie Quackenbush, science teacher, grade 6 at Parker.
I would like to clarify, I did not say it wasn't possible. I said it's something that we could do as we get closer to the school year because we don't have the room set up yet. And I actually wrote a note saying that we would do that as we got closer to the school year.
okay. John,
Sorry, Chuck, could I ask a
Sure,
question
sure.
on that? Dr. Doherty, John Parks, you toured a couple of the schools today and saw what some of the rooms will look like. I know they're sort of illustrative. Is there anything illustrative that's already? I guess I'm not clear on what John saw versus what it sounds like she's asking for. It sounds like they're the same thing.
So we have a couple of rooms set up with the 3-foot because we wanted to see what it looked like, which was part of our feasibility space plan. It would look much different if it was 6-foot, but right now everything was set up for 3-foot, and it was 2 classrooms that were set up,
Okay.
or 3 classrooms, 2 at the high school, 1 at Coolidge. The chairs and desks are essentially in rows 3 feet apart from each other.
Sorry, sorry, I misunderstood what John was saying he saw this morning.
You all set, Sean?
I am. It looks like Aaron has a question.
Aaron?
Yeah, since I'm away this week and wasn't able to get into the buildings this week, and some of us, it sounds like, are going to be getting into buildings next week, is it possible even to have 1 or 2 classrooms set up so that we could take pictures for folks of desks 6 feet apart?
We could. The desks that we showed today were for 3-foot because that was what we were trying to see from a feasibility standpoint with the in-person model. So when we were doing the study, that's what Desi asked us to do. What our plan is we're going to keep the same 3-foot configurations in the classrooms, but students are going to be seated 6 feet apart so that we can have different students sitting in different seats with different cohorts. So they're not going to be sitting in the same seats as their other cohort. So it's going to be set up the same way.
So students would be sitting every other desk.
Correct.
If they were in person.
Correct.
Okay. It still might be helpful for families trying to make that decision to have a picture of it or a sense of it. I think it's a fair ask.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. John?
Yep. And I've got this as Chris 69301.
Yep.
Good evening. First, I will start by thanking all of you for your time and effort on the reopening of schools. I cannot imagine being in your position and having to make these decisions, but know that you are all appreciated. I truly can't understand how we are going to try to send our children back into an environment that is nothing like they have ever been in. School as they know it is over for now. There is no real socialization, no sharing materials, no working together, and no real contact with their friends and teachers. My son Jackson is going into 1st grade at Killam. Last year, he had an amazing relationship with his kindergarten teacher who he hugged every single day. Many children need that interaction and comfort during the school day, especially young kids. Unfortunately, as we have seen, the numbers in mass are starting to creep up. Knowing that a surge is inevitable, why try to send them into a hybrid model only to end up pulling them out again? Many say the kids will be fine. They hardly get sick if they get COVID-19. While that may be true, some of these children's lives with their grandparents, who most certainly would not be okay if they contracted COVID-19. I personally live with my parents in a 2-family house. My father is considered high risk and may not make it if he contracts COVID-19. This is the same for the teachers themselves and their families. There is much more evidence to show that children do spread the virus just as adults do. Our kids will adapt. Remote learning will not go on for the rest of their lives. They will be okay. Why risk the health of them, our families, our teachers, staff, and their families? Our teachers have very clearly stated how concerned they are, and I don't blame them one bit. While these plans look beautiful on paper and have the best intentions, they will not work. Not for staff and not for the students. Working from home and teaching is not ideal at all. Both myself and my husband work full-time, so I truly understand that. Many of our teachers are teaching our children while also teaching their own at home. I myself will not be going back to work and will be helping a few families out with remote learning, whether that be hybrid or all remote. We are in a global pandemic. We are all in the same situation, and it's heartbreaking, but I ask you, what is more important than the health and safety of our kids, our teachers, and all of our families? This will not last forever. We can and will all work together to keep our kids safe and happy until COVID-19 hopefully calms down. Thank you for your time and stay well. Kristen LaChance.
Thank you, John. Okay, we skipped over the email from Mr. Perry, and I'm happy to read that. Says, or actually I got it, but it's to the committee, or I'll read it to the committee. It says, Charles, respectfully, as I watch this meeting, not one person on the committee has taken a stand for the people that elected you. Rather, your committee seems to want to defer to DESE and the state for a decision. We elected you to be conduits for us. This is confusing. So, I'll say to that, we are not abdicating our decision to the state. We are, however, subject to guidelines by the state that we have to follow when we put these plans together and make our decision. So I don't know if anybody else wants to weigh in on that, but
I'll make Chuck, if I could just make a quick comment.
Yes.
I don't view our role as taking a poll and doing what's necessarily popular. I view our role as making difficult decisions with all of the information that we can gather. If people disagree with our judgment, they get an opportunity every 3 years. I'm up, here in 8 months. They get an opportunity every 3 years to show us the door. But, with all due respect, we are all wrestling with this decision. We are all taking into account the many, many viewpoints we're getting on both sides of the equation. I know we're all taking it very seriously and hearing what parents, teachers on both sides of the discussion think about things. So,
thank you. Aaron, did you raise, or is that from earlier? Sorry.
That was earlier.
I'm sorry. Okay, so I did get another.
But Tom just raised. Sorry.
Tom just
sorry?
raised his hand. Tom just raised his hand.
Tom?
Sorry, Chuck. I put raised as soon as your head went down. I apologize. I was going to say, somewhat similar to Sean, is there are a lot of constituents that are giving very diverse opinions throughout this process. There's not a single consolidated voice of everybody in agreement in any way. And so we have to weigh that feedback. And as I've been thinking about it, I've been thinking, and as well as our own personal opinions, right? So that all comes into it as part of this conversation too. I've been looking at it and trying to say, how do we provide, for lack of a better way to say, choice to some parents who want to put their kids in, but also choice to those parents that want to pull out. And I think the plan that's put forward does provide that choice. Ultimately, it's allowing for parents to make their choices, and then to a degree, and definitely as well, teachers to make their choices. Now, the problem we might face, as I think we're all aware, is when those choices diverge, right? And unfortunately, we don't know right now, so we're going with imperfect information. And we have to make the best decision we have with the information we have available to us. That may mean something changes in 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, but we're using the information available, public information as well as others, to provide the best deliberation, discussion, and ultimately decision that we can, given the information available right now.
Okay, thank you. Was there another email from Chris?
Yes,
No.
but just to say that she was referring to the other one as public comment. There's one more
Okay.
we have from Jess Bailey.
Okay, Tom, did you want to read or Carla, the Jess Bailey one?
Sure. Hello, Kate, John, and school committee members. At tonight's school committee meeting, Dr. Doherty explained that the reason for delaying the high school starting in person until October 5th was to give the district time to hire staff to make the hybrid model workable. I am concerned about this logic because those students are still supposed to be learning from September 15th to October 5th. Who is going to be teaching them remotely? If we don't have enough teachers to staff the hybrid model, how do we have enough staff to teach them remotely during the first 4 weeks of school? Will this require teachers to take on more than the contractually permissible number of preps? Will students be given a study hall until their actual classes begin on October 15th? If the reason we are starting later in the school year is in order to hire staff, doesn't that instead indicate that the best course of action, the one that gives our students the most robust education and utilizes the teachers who want to teach but need remote accommodations to do so? Thank you, Jess Bailey.
Chuck,
Okay,
can I
thank
respond
you.
to that?
I'm sorry?
May I respond to that?
Yes.
What I said is that the high school schedule is going to be very complicated to put together because over the next 3 weeks, we're going to be getting not only the students that are going to be going fully remote, but staff who are requesting leaves. So once we have that information is when the high school can truly put down their schedule. We are not going to be hiring staff all the way up to October 5th. That is not what I meant. What I meant was the job is going to be very difficult to begin with because we're going to have to put those schedules together. And there are going to be leaves. Either way, there's going to be leaves, whether we're remote, whether we're hybrid, whether we're in person, there's going to be leaves. So what we're trying to do is we've got to post those leaves and we've got to hire those leaves. So regardless of the model, we're going to have to do that.
John?
Dr. Doherty, as far as right now, do you know how many open positions we currently have prior to anybody taking leave?
I don't believe we have any open teacher positions right now. I think we've filled the ones that have been open.
Thank you.
Tom?
So this was what I was going to ask a question about earlier as well. And the schedule and the hiring, I heard it very similar to the way that Mrs. Bailey just presented it as well. So I know sometimes that happens as we're trying to explain things. But if we're worried about the schedule, even if we're just worried about the schedule going up to 9:15, then those high school students, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, remotely, we're going to still have the same problem, right? So, we have to make sure, we have an obligation to make sure that they're starting learning at the same time that everybody else is. And so I'm worried about that. And I was going to propose or ask if we could amend things to move those dates up a couple weeks to be 9/22 and 9/29. I don't know if we can do that. It's a little bit operational from a discussion point, but it seems to me like the reason for it, I understand it. I understand the high school schedule is the most complex. I understand there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of different, levels, between CP, SCP, honors, AP, and some of the contractions that have happened there to remove some of those levels. So I get that, but I still have the same concern about, well, what are the students going to be doing on 9/15 if we haven't finished the schedule on 9/15? And if we're really that concerned, are we then saying that the high school students aren't really starting anything until 9/22, 9/29, if the schedule is the gating factor?
Tom, they'll be starting on 9/15 with a fully remote schedule until they become hybrid.
So
I'm just outlining that we've got some challenges ahead of us no matter what model we choose. That's what I'm trying to explain. Because, and I don't believe, I mean, we didn't create this situation.
Oh, I know that.
But we have been getting slow guidance, and I don't want to throw the state under the bus, but I guess I am. We've been getting slow guidance from the state. We have been doing our research. We've done everything we can to put together the plan that we have. Every school district is in this boat right now. I'm suggesting the phase-in model so that we can do it right.
So I think, I at least for me, just to have the conversation here, right? Because the public wants us to have it, and I think it's worthwhile as well as a committee to have it. At least for me, I'm not opposed to the overall concept of a phase-in model and to work some things through. And I think there's some things in there that make a lot of sense. Let's get the 6th graders in there 1 week ahead so they can get used to their space. I don't know if Coolidge has it, but Parker has their welcome to Parker. It was just 1 day, but conceptually that's essentially what we're trying to do over a week period for the new 6th graders, right? So I understand that. I'm less understanding, even with all the moving parts. I'm also understanding of the elementary, K through 2. Let's get them going. Then we can bring 3 through 5 and build in. And I appreciate that, from some of the earlier versions, we now see that A and B are lined up, and I'm very clear that A is on 1 week, B is on the next week, regardless of school, regardless of level. But I have a problem that our high schoolers, if we think that being in person is as beneficial as some of us think it is, as I think it is, I have a problem that they're not going to be able to be in person until the 4th week and the 5th week of school. And if there's any room for reconsideration, that would be one thing I would ask us to reconsider. But again,
I'll be more than happy to review it with the high school principal. I've already had that conversation with her, and I'm not sure it's possible, and I don't want to promise something we can't do. It would have to be 9th and 10th grade because that's one cohort of teachers. Mm-hmm. So you would have to have them in for 9th and 10th.
Yep.
I just don't know if we can do anything more than that. What we're proposing, which is why, I mean, we vetted this all out with our principals before we put it out to the public.
I know they've been part of the team the whole time, and I appreciate that. So anybody else can jump in on this topic or not, but I have one more question with regards to staff to build on John's question. And that is, well, we don't have any known gaps from an existing staff perspective. From a model perspective, do we have gaps that we're expecting to have to hire? And so that's the budgetary role of our role here is, does this plan introduce model gaps that lead us to have to hire additional staff to fill the satellite rooms? Or are we confident now, after all the analysis that everybody's been able to do, that the existing staff we have will suffice? And just to layer on top of that, the conversation we've started to have, but haven't really gone into much, of the specialists, which was a big topic last week. And there was going to be takeaway of coming back to what that would look like. Some of the public comment that's either in the packet that we spoke to asked those questions as well, in terms of number of students they see. And I know there was work there. So can we talk a little bit about what hiring gap we have as a result of this process, and what we're planning, if anything, to address some of the concerns from the specialists?
So the principals right now are going through where the gaps are for the coverage of the satellite rooms. It will most likely lead to some increases in tutors and paraeducator, regular ed paraeducator hours, or some additional paraeducator tutor staff to make it happen. I'm not sure the amount yet, but yes.
Okay.
In terms of this, which I've said all along, I
Yeah.
never said this was going to be done,
Free,
you know,
right?
without any
Yeah.
costs.
Right.
In fact, the in-person model, we would even need even more staff to make happen.
Correct.
The specialist piece, I met with a group of the specialists the other day. I asked the principals to see if we could do a semester on, semester off, or a quarter on, quarter off model where a specialist, this is more an elementary art and music issue, is really what it is. Because we have building-based staff for PE and library in all 5 schools. So because we share specialist staff between the schools, this is what makes it a little bit more problematic. We could not do a semester on, semester off in a building. We couldn't do quarter on, quarter off. However, in further conversations with the principals, the art and music teachers have very little role in the satellite coverages. So they're going to be teaching their classes. The other piece that we discussed was the remote piece. The asynchronous lesson, there was some confusion about what their role was, in regards to what our expectations were. And once we clarified that the expectations were different, that we wanted them to pool a lesson asynchronously for an entire district, not just several grade levels at one school, they felt much better about that.
Thank you for
So
that.
that's where we're at with the specialists.
Aaron, did you?
Yeah. So one of the letters tonight, the specialist gave a number, 650 kids. Is that accurate?
That was last year, and she was teaching Rise as well, I believe. That is not accurate.
So what kind of numbers are we talking about?
It's not even close to that. It's not even, I mean, they'll be teaching, they're only teaching half of their classes, because remember, they're not doing the remote piece. So they're only teaching half of their classes.
Okay. But you did say, I think elementary and middle school specialists are recording remote lessons on Fridays that will happen.
Elementary.
Just elementary?
Yeah. Okay.
So when the kids are doing those lessons, they won't have any guidance, though? They'll just be...
It'll be an asynchronous lesson that the students will access.
That they'll do on their own at home without the teacher guidance. Okay.
Correct.
That wasn't my original question, though, if I can ask something else.
Sure.
One of the themes that has been in a lot of the letters from both teachers and parents has been about how different school will look, how scary that might be for kids. And I was actually wondering if Jen Stiles could talk about ESY a little bit and how that program went this summer, because they have actually already lived this reality.
So, hi everyone. I'm not Jen Stice. I'm just playing one on TV. Her internet is not working. She's been texting us back and forth. I was at both of the special ed meetings that she had with the entire staff. They were invited the last couple of days to discuss any questions or concerns they have. And they actually showed a video of some Rise, little vignettes of what's gone on in Rise, and just the happy faces of kids, the social distancing, the 6 feet distancing, and the use of masks, but really just from my takeaway, there were a lot of positive moments in the videos of real learning that was taking place. And overall, I know John can talk more about it, but overall, the messaging was that it was very positive for the students that were able to attend in person this summer, as well as a robust remote experience for the kids that couldn't come in. So yeah, I don't know if you have any other questions or if John wants to say more.
No, I think you captured it, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Carla?
Thank you. I just have to say, Dr. Doherty and the rest of the staff, thank you for, honestly, for what you guys have been doing. It has truly been remarkable and not an easy job. Quick question, just to follow up on the discussion you had with Erin about specials and an elementary school music teacher who may be in 2 different schools. I can't help but think that 500 number may be accurate or low. If we're talking a music teacher in 2 elementary schools of 500 children each, that right? Is that teacher?
They don't have all the students in that school. We have multiple teachers in each. So at school we'll have 2 art teachers. The school will have 2 music teachers, not just 1 necessarily.
Okay, but if they're not, if it's not 1 per school, right? Joshua Eaton doesn't have a separate or a one-off teacher for music. I mean, that would be 500 students if they're splitting it amongst multiple. I think we understand what the issue is some teachers are dealing with hundreds of students, and we may not be able to get around that in some respects.
Right. That's the nature of their job.
Right.
Yeah. They need.
And
yeah.
So maybe the idea is not so much the in-person, but the remote ability to help cut down on those numbers. Still teaching the class, but using the remote ability of using camera systems and things like that.
The problem is there's going to be. Sorry, I got this thing in my throat. There's going to be staff that are going to have to be in both weeks, no matter what model we choose, what hybrid model we choose. We don't have a choice. Right. If it's not the specialist, it's going to be the classroom teachers. So it's a trade-off. If we don't want our teachers to be teaching both remote and in person at the same time, which I don't recommend, and I know the teachers do not want to do that either. It requires 2 different skill sets. Someone is going to have to be in the building both weeks. And we've got other staff in the building both weeks as well. It's not just teachers. We've got all of our administrators, food service staff, secretaries, custodians. We've got other staff in the building that are going to be there both weeks, that are going to have contact with children.
Sure. And I appreciate you looking into that too, because I know it's a concern, but I understand that concept as well. So thank you. My comment, this is a really difficult decision. It's a difficult position. I have heard from a lot of different parents. I always go back to my golden rule of what's best for students. I truly believe that what's best for students is to get them back in brick and mortar as much as possible. I like the hybrid model for where we're at right now. I will say that my issue at this moment, and I'm still struggling with it, but my issue at this moment is that phased in process. I understand that it came about kind of quickly for some, but not obviously for the people receiving the information. My concern is I like the idea of, I understand kindergarten screening is, it takes 4 days in the elementary schools. I'm wondering why we can't get another grade level to start during that same week, understanding that kindergarten screening can be done in the gymnasium or somewhere else. We could have maybe first and second grade starting school that same week. I feel like pushing everything up. I like the idea of having sixth grade start early and phasing those students in. I think that's helpful. And I feel that way with the high school as well. I'm hearing concerns coming from the high school. I feel like we owe it to the students to be ready for them and be prepared for them. We don't know yet if we're going to have an issue with not having enough teachers. We won't know that until we hear back from teachers. On the flip side, I understand that we may have an issue with hiring additional teachers to cover the other remote rooms. But I really feel that we need to get those seniors, those juniors, the 9th and 10th, that cohort A and B in the high school, to get them back in earlier. In terms of, rolling out our food service and rolling out our cleaning protocols and any glitches we have with remote learning, I feel like we have 3 different scenarios where we have the elementary schools and we have the middle schools and we have the high school level. And I feel like we need to kind of push up a few weeks, especially on the high school side, because I think of the seniors going back to high school and having to apply to colleges and not really having the access to the guidance counselors that they normally would have had. So I can imagine that stress on them is through the roof right now. Same with the juniors going into high school. So for me, I am prepared to vote on this hybrid model. I am having issues and I'm struggling with this phased-in approach. But I truly do appreciate all the work that has been done on this. And I feel like we really owe it to the students to get them back as soon as possible in brick and mortar as soon as possible and to do that safely.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, Dr. Dory, I had the luxury of going to all 6 of your parent meetings over the last couple of weeks. And something I took away with yesterday's and today's was the specials we're looking at quarterly switching them out instead of having them go to 2 schools at the same time. Is that still the case?
No, I can't do it. I had the principals try to do it. We can't do it. We don't have enough to do it.
Okay. And then as far as rolling out the hybrid approach, right now we're at a level 3 for the state. I agree with going hybrid. I agree with the phased-in approach. I think it's the right tempo. I think it's the right pace to get the student body in and really start opening up the schools. Something we all heard was that, the 6th grade's going back. Why aren't the freshmen? The freshmen are a cohort with the 10th graders. I think staggering the starts the way you did it, I completely agree with, and I thank you for all the work you did on that.
Sean?
Yeah, I was going to say something similar to John, which is that the phase-in is probably honestly the only thing that gets me comfortable with hybrid at this point. And I think there's another rationale that didn't appear on Dr. Doherty's slide there, which something I alluded to last week. But we're making this decision on August 6th. We've all seen from the pandemic that a lot changes. We learn a lot in 5 or 6 weeks, and I was, prior to seeing this phase in, I was pretty uncomfortable putting us on a collision course with being back in the building, across the school district, 4,000 plus students on September 15th, knowing that a lot of things are likely to change and that we're going to get a lot more data points from, schools that are opening around the country in a variety of different models. So the phased-in approach gives me a lot more comfort with us, planning for hybrid, planning for being back in person, starting in September and going into the first week or 2 of October. What was the other thing I was going to say about that? Well, I'll come back to it. But yeah, it makes me a lot more comfortable with the hybrid model, the phased-in approach.
Thank you, Sean. Aaron?
I was wondering, oh, okay. I was wondering if Chris could actually speak a little bit more to the conversations that have been had and the plans that are starting to be made about how we will support students with this massive change in regards to school as they know it, if they are to come back in person. I know that you are planning some of this for part of the 10 days of training, but I would just love to hear you speak more about some of those plans.
So, hi, everyone. Yeah, so I think we're going to really, just like with students, our in-person time is going to be gold. That's the term I've been using. Our phase-in with our staff is also going to be golden time. Those 10 days are going to be very precious to us. We have a lot of work to do in a short time. So as far as the PD, I think that was part of what your question was. We are going to focus on a couple of major themes. Obviously, health, safety, our mandated training. We are also going to focus on use of technology and what remote learning could look like, or some of the consistencies around that. We also are going to spend a major emphasis on equity and how that works into all the work, the very lens in which we make our decisions this year and really every year. And then we also are really going to be spending some time with the understanding by design philosophy, the UDL, the design for learning philosophy, which is a differentiated approach, especially with our remote learning. I think that's a major focus for us. So we're just starting to piece those days together. And then the remainder of the days will be to how to use some of the universal tools and how do we get remote learning sort of up and ready, the hybrid weeks, as well as our content tools. So some of our content tools that are new to us, like our Pearson Math or our National Geographic, or some of the other tools like STEM Scopes that we've been using for a very long time that may have a digital aspect. We'll be spending some of the time on that. We're also going to be working with department heads and our coordinators, and our directors are already working on curriculum compacting and really looking at what was done in the spring, what wasn't done in the spring, what are foundational skills that have to be taught. I would say first and foremost, our major focus as we start really rebuilding this, as John calls it, the new school, right? This two types of school is a major focus on social emotional, and really looking at, we already do a youth mental health training for all of our staff. We are going to, part of our onboarding this year with all of our staff is really looking at trauma-informed decision-making. And not just trauma with the students, but trauma with the staff. We've all suffered tremendous loss through this, and really working through some of those feelings and really trying to connect with kids. We know that engagement is key. We can't engage with kids if they're feeling isolated or traumatized. So that's going to be a major piece of work that our principals will be helping us with that as well. I don't know if you had further questions, if I explained that well enough for you, Erin.
You did, thank you. But to piggyback on that and what you started to say, you know, it's, if anything is clear from all of the staff letters we've gotten, is that there's a lot of fear and anxiety there for our staff as well. So what can we do to support the staff who do, for whatever reason, whether they have to come back because they need the income, or whether they're choosing to come back but they're still feeling very fearful? Like what can we do to support our staff?
So I guess I don't have a clear answer for that. What I can tell you is our principals have really strong cultures in their buildings. This is the kind of work they do every day. I think I read one time that at any one point, 50% of your staff is in some sort of crisis. And by crisis, I mean lowercase and uppercase C. And sometimes those are going back to school, new children, new home, sickness in the family, death in the family, all of that. Obviously, this pandemic is something that none of us would have ever predicted. And I certainly know full well what that feels like, to have tremendous fear and tremendous loss. I think like most things in Reading, we're just going to have to do it together and really work through those things and try to provide as safe an environment as humanly possible. And there's so many pieces that are going into that. I think that's really the best we can do and offer for our staff, because we really do care about them. And I know our principals are working really hard, as well as the central office team, on that.
Erin, can I
Yeah.
piggyback a little bit on that? So I think it's another reason to do the phase-in approach. I think the virus is real, but there's a huge psychological piece to this too right now that we're all feeling. And I think it like we saw with ESY, once the staff got in there and got comfortable with working with the students, it became a much better process. And I think the phase-in, that's another reason to do the phase-in, for that very reason that you're bringing up.
Okay.
Tom?
So, Aaron, thank you for that question, and Chris, thank you for the feedback there. I wanted to pull a string a little bit there and see if we can hear a little bit more about and all the work that's been done from a curriculum perspective leading into this year. I know last week we had a review of some of the new materials available, but I keep getting questions in terms of what are we going to do to catch up. It's probably, I think in the past we talked about it not all happening in 1 year potentially. You mentioned the compaction of standards and picking out the key ones and building on top of them. So I think that's one of the other concerns from parents, especially for those that are in the formative years, and then again for those that are in the pre-college years. And having kids in both, I'm still also concerned for middle school too. But I think if you can talk a little bit through the actions that has been going through over the summer and what we're trying to do there. Are we going to have amended, curriculum guides that show the compaction that's happening, or anything else along those lines? I know you still have the regular curriculum guides on your list for the end of the year, but
I can
talk through that. That'd be great.
Can talk a little bit through that, Tom. So this DESE is not allowing us to change the standards. So the curriculum guides that we have on our website that are done, which are most of the high school core classes, all of the elementary courses, grade levels and subjects, and we have some done at the middle school, but they're not all finished. We're still in various stages of those. Those cannot really change. The state hasn't really loosened up on any of the standards. What I can tell you is that we've already started to pick apart that. Our work, especially at the elementary level, our awesome curriculum coordinators have already been really looking at that. So typically we meet on Wednesday afternoons throughout the year and say, all right, what units are we covering at this month, or what are we doing? We're already having those conversations, and our staff will be getting information about that soon. At the high school and middle school levels, that is going to be done by curriculum leads and department heads. Some of that work has already been started. In the spring, before we ended school, we did survey folks to see what had been covered, what were the core standards that were covered before our period of closure, and what were introduced during our period of closure. The next step during those 10 days will be to really pull apart and say, all right, what are the mastery skills that need to be taught? So some of the, I'll give an example of history. History 9, 10, and 11, they all build into each other. If History 9 didn't cover core concepts, then before we could move into History 10, we would have to pull out the essential skills that need to be taught. There are some school classes, obviously, that sunsetted at the high school, and some of those courses may have foundational skills that you need in order to be successful in other schools. In other courses. So those are the conversations that were started in the spring by surveying department heads of exactly what was covered. And then now becomes really the Herculean task of saying, all right, this is what we typically cover in a year. I think one of the things that we have to remember is that we're still having school. Our remote school is going to look different. Our, as you call it, the brick and mortar school will be half of the time. The other half of the time will be remote school. So we are still going to cover or, teach a lot of the things that we would normally teach. We're going to have to be more intentional about it. We're going to have to look for ways to engage students, because sitting in front of a Zoom link all day isn't exactly engaging. So we're going to have to really be very intentional. We're going to have to do more formative assessments than we've done in the past. We've also been working with a group to really determine what our remote platforms look like. You know, when parents log into Google Classroom, we want to have a consistent view of that so that people aren't having to constantly search for things. And so we've been working with a group to set some norms and routines that we'll bring back to the buildings and ask our stakeholders for input. So we've been very busy this summer. Obviously, as you know, our teachers don't work all summer. So that 10 days at the beginning is going to be really important to have those stakeholders sitting at the table. And right now, we've had so many teachers involved in the planning process, coming to our meetings, coming to the forums. All of our subcommittees have been meeting all summer, and we have teachers on all of that. So I really do want to say a huge shout out to them because they really have given up their time this summer. But a lot of the core work is going to have to wait until everyone is there so that we can really hear from all parties.
Thank you.
Chuck, if I may have one other question or request as we go through some of this.
Sure.
So I think first of all, John, thank you for, acknowledging the kindergarten, I guess, issue as part of your presentation. And that we're, looking at exploring the other options of either being in there for 2 weeks or for all 2 weeks, or potentially reducing costs and coming back to us and, giving us the impact of that. I think that would be, in many cases, the full experience is what a lot of parents want. And, if not, then, pay for what you experience, I guess, is somewhat of a model that people are asking for. I'm going to request now as part of that is when you come back with an adjustment, if we can have some details about how many withdrawals we've had, a bit of an analysis of potentials of what happens based upon different price points, for lack of a better way to say. So we have 1 or 2 or 3 different options to choose from to a degree. None of it's going to be perfect. I know that because parents will do different things based upon what comes out of it. But the fact that we will at least have that conversation, I think, is going to be encouraging to a large portion of that community. And I'm sure we'll get feedback from them as well when it comes to that point. But I wanted to, again, thank you for hearing them and putting out reconsideration for different ideas in that front. So thank you again.
You're welcome.
Aaron?
I echo what Tom was saying. So obviously, you and I have talked about kindergarten several times. So I do appreciate that all of the principals are really looking closely at that. My question is about next steps. So I know that we will vote tonight, but it's also clear that there are some unknown factors. So kindergarten is a big unknown. The specific health metrics are a big unknown. What is the timeline for staff and families to have to make commitments after tonight?
Good question. So what the plan is tomorrow, we will send out a questionnaire to families. There'll be some specific questions they'll have to identify themselves so that we can make it a building specific issues. We're going to ask questions like, do they need technology? Do they need internet access? Are they going to require, meals, free and reduced meals through distribution? We're going to ask if they want to be in the same cohort or not. That we'll try to do the best we can with that. We're going to, the kindergarten piece will ask a question about kindergarten if it's a kindergarten age student. So there's a whole series of, and whether or not they're going to be remote, fully remote. So that's going to go out tomorrow. At the same time, parallel, we're doing the same with staff. We've already been going through the medical pieces, whether it can be a simple accommodation or it's going to be a full-fledged medical leave of absence. So we're we've already started going through that as well. We're going to give people about a week because we really can't give them too much longer than that. And the assumption would be if they don't respond, we'll, the best we can reach out. But the assumption would be that they would be in person, hybrid, instead of remote. So that's the process that we're going to be going through. In terms of the metrics, we're going to wait for Desi to give us some guidance next week on that. And, at the same time, we've got other timelines, other tasks on the timelines that we're doing as well. We're imaging all of the technology that's been coming in, and we'll have to start deploying that out to the families that need it. So there'll be a process with that. Obviously, we're setting up all the schools, all of that piece as well. So there's a lot of things on the timelines.
So it'll go out tomorrow, but how long will people have to respond?
A week.
A week.
Really can't give them more than that.
You good, Aaron?
Sorry, one more. Regarding the kindergarten parents again, have we allowed them to put their August payment on hold until we're able to give them more definitive information?
Linda, have we done the? Linda, you there?
Yep, parents have been sending in. People have reached out to explaining their circumstances, so we've told them to wait, but for the most part, they're starting to send them in.
Okay.
So if we need to come back to the committee with a shift in the tuition, we can adjust that for the rest of the year because most of them are on monthly payments.
At this point, do we know when we're meeting next?
No.
We're gonna have to meet for the policy pieces, and I've got Michael.
Yeah, we'll let you know by tomorrow, Aaron. I wanted to get through tonight.
I've got Michael Joyce reviewing the
Yeah.
MASC policies for the committee to review.
Okay, thank you.
Tom, did you have a question, or are you referring to the public comment?
I had one more question, and well, it was actually two because I was going to make the point about policies, but that's been made already. So the one question I had was a follow-up from last week. I know many of us have had the conversation, but I don't know that we've communicated back out to the public yet. The conversation around tents and the exploratory research around tents, cost, implication, availability, things along that. I know there's been some research there, so just in a public disclosure perspective, I wonder if we can get that feedback out publicly.
John,
Gail,
or you?
Would you like me to do it?
I'm sorry? Gail or John?
Gail, did you want me to do it?
Sure.
Okay. So we looked into the feasibility of having tents. There's a couple of issues with tents. First of all, the availability of tents right now is not. There's a very high demand for them for obvious reasons. It's not just schools looking for them. It's restaurants. It's other venues. We would have to procure bids, and we would have to then look at size of tents, the cost of it, estimate to put one tent, to rent tents for one tent at each school. You're looking at, for a couple of months rent, of about $30,000 if you want to go beyond that. And that's just for one tent per school. In addition to that, we have to follow all building codes, fire codes, because they're considered structures. It's not just as simple as putting up a pop-up tent and using it for student use. There's a lot that would have to go with that. It's also the maintaining of it. If there's going to be furniture put out there, we would have to then clean the furniture. We would have to take the furniture in every night. I mean, it's all of those logistical issues that would go with it as well. At the end of the day, the risk, not the risk, but the benefit of using the tents at each building, or we really wouldn't benefit overall the large group of students, because we would not be able to put enough out there to have multiple outdoor classes. And it would still have to be at 6-foot distance, even though they weren't wearing masks.
Thank you.
John, will classes have the option to, absence of the tents, still go outside, you know, on a nice day, obviously,
Yes.
and do that?
Yep, they absolutely can. And the principals will set up some procedures and protocols on how to make that work.
Okay, we have, I got another email that just came to me from Mr. Perry, but I think it's appropriate to read it. It says, I am not sure if you realize, but the amendment that was passed earlier in the meeting essentially overrules the main vote. When that amendment was passed, we relinquished ownership over the future of the discussion right now is simply a dog and a pony. I'm sure that Carla knows that the point she raised earlier will give up control, and I'm not sure that's a good thing. She relinquished that control with this amendment. I do appreciate the fastidious that reading these emails provides, but I do not see how this is conducted to making responsible decisions for our community. I do see how this process absolves the school committee of responsibility in the decision. Maybe that's the purpose of this. Thank you for your consideration, Justin Perry. I mean, the editorial comments, I'm not interested in discussing, but I do want to talk about the amendment thing. I don't read it I don't interpret the amendment that way. So I don't know if anyone else, Tom, you made the amendment. Do you want to comment on it?
I mean, I just posted it back so everybody could see it again themselves, but the way I mean, the reality, there's a bunch of realities here, right? Just as when we closed school in March, there was little that we had to do or say about that, right? There is the state government related side to it. Yes, we have a bit of local control. I suppose theoretically we could say, well, we're Reading, we're thumbing your noses at DESE and what they're suggesting. And the state, although I think we would fight a losing battle if we even tried that. So the reality of what this motion did in my mind was to provide some clarity about when and where we would move to different models in alignment with an already established pattern that the rest of us are following our lives by, essentially, right, for the current time. Whether we like the fact that we're following our lives by that is a whole other story. But it's not unheard of, and it's not us, in my mind, absolving ourselves of responsibility of the gravity of the decision or anything else like that. It's just providing a little bit more of a handrail, a guide rail around the process. And when the DESE stuff comes out next week, you know, we already know we're kind of bound to them anyway. That is how the regulations work. We have a little bit of flexibility in there, but otherwise we're generally bound by those regulations anyway. So yeah, I don't see a problem personally here from my perspective.
Yeah, I agree, and you know, thank you for the amendment. The other comment about that email I will respond to is the reading to the emails. So we've started our remote school committee meetings back in April. And part of the guidelines of public meetings is to have public input. And we've always done that in person. We are now unfortunately having to be remote, and not wanting to eliminate or not being able to eliminate that protocol of having public input. We have at every meeting historically read emails from the public, and I'm thankful that the public participates and wants to send their and feels comfortable sending their comments in. So that's why we're reading the emails. It gives us more information before we make the decision. Carla?
Yeah, I'd like to address Mr. Perry's comment of, I don't feel like we as a committee are relinquishing our responsibility at all. And I think that this motion has just aligned us or recognized the state protocol of the state's phases. So I do not think of that as a relinquishing of our authority or responsibility at all.
Thank you. Aaron?
Just to chime in on that, there is nothing easy about the decision that we have to make tonight. I don't think any of us have taken this lightly. I take all of the correspondence very seriously. I've had many conversations, many conversations over the last week, and I weigh all of that as part of this decision and part of this discussion. So I don't see us as trying to shirk responsibility here. I see us as trying to think very critically, very carefully about what is in the best interest for the students and the staff of our district and in moving forward, and in a very difficult situation that has a lot of unknowns still for all of us.
Thank you. John Parks?
I'm going to follow suit with what Carla said. I absolutely agree with everything she said. I've watched multiple districts do this vote at this point. I've read multiple plans from other districts. I've listened to parents. I've listened to teachers. This has been probably one of the hardest decisions I need to make tonight, because it's not just affecting our students, it's affecting our staff. And it's a responsibility I don't think a single one of us would ever take lightly. The six of us, I guarantee you, have lost sleep over the decision we're making tonight. I know I have. And, the motion was to give us just a little bit of guidance until DESE comes out with their guidance, which we know is going to be within about a week. It just gives us that leeway of saying we know how we can move between the different phases. The ultimate power is in operations. That's Dr. Doherty's realm. That is not our realm. We're policy, procedures, guidelines, budget, hiring and firing of the superintendent. We all know that, and we take it very seriously. So, Carla, thank you for what you said. It was right on point. This vote's something that I will never take lightly, and I appreciate all the work this panel has done.
Thank you, John. We had another public comment email from Kristen LaChance. I can read it. And it was in response to the previous email, and it was in response to our response to the previous email on the specialist. They are not seeing half their caseloads. They are seeing all their students over the course of both weeks, and they're expected to be there both weeks. They're being exposed to all children. Why are the specialists being sacrificed, so to speak? Everyone needs just to be remote. It's not safe. Kristen LaChance. John, can you just clarify that what's right and what's...
So Chuck, I really haven't talked about this part tonight, but all of our special ed teachers pretty much are going to be there both weeks as well. Because our students on IEPs, particularly in our programs, are going to be there both weeks. So the specialists are not the only staff that are going to be there. As I mentioned earlier, there are several staff that are going to be there both weeks. Both teachers, paraeducators, food service, custodians, administrators, secretaries. There's a lot of staff that are going to be there. In order to do a hybrid model, you need staff there both weeks. And if it's not going to be the specialists, it's going to be the classroom teachers. So it's unfortunately this, we've said this before, it's the best of the imperfect models.
Okay, we just got another email public comment from Beth Hurley. I just want to follow up on the comment on the specialist placement at the elementary schools. Joshua Eaton and Barrow share art and music teachers. One music teacher at Eaton and 2 art teachers. Barrows has 1 art teacher and 2 music teachers. So, guess that was a clarification. I think we got to all the public comment. Did I don't think I missed any.
I agree.
Okay, so I guess we're ready for the vote or any other discussion that anyone wants to add. Carla?
I'm Dr. Doherty, if you can enlighten me, I'm having a hard time with the cohorts at the high school, and I think I missed something. They're going back later because of the difficulty in the scheduling piece of it, or is it the staff for in-person learning, the additional rooms, or the staffing, not having enough staff for additional rooms?
No, it's a combination of a few things, Carla, and it's right now it's a moving target because there's a lot of unknowns. The high school schedule you see on paper is just what it is right now. It's on paper. It now needs to be transferred to individual student schedules. We need to know first, what does our remote group look like for students? What staff are going to be available, or are they going to be on leave? Are they going to be available remote? How can we access them? So we have to create schedules with 1,200 students trying to figure that out. That's going to take a little bit of time. So there's that piece. At the same time, if you've got vacancies, we're going to have to start hiring those vacancies. So those are the moving pieces that are going on.
So the question is, would we even, with those circumstances, would we be able to start remote?
Yes.
Mid-September?
Yes, we will.
How? I mean, the schedules have to be put together and you need at least the primary teachers to teach those classes, right?
Mrs. Boynton explained to me that yes, they'll be able to do that.
So for me, that's why I don't understand if it was a situation where there was something in the building. So in a classroom setting, in a brick and mortar setting, if you didn't have enough teachers for the supplemental rooms, I could understand that piece of it. But in terms of we have a schedule together, we have the appropriate teachers to teach, that has to be in place, whether it's remote or whether it's in person. And so for me, that's a reason to push this phased-in approach up. Really, in some instances, in 2 weeks up.
I don't think it's realistic, Carla. And
So-
and again, that's more the operations side. That's not a that you're voting tonight on the preferred model of a hybrid model.
Right, but
What it looks like, we're doing the best we can to phase it in.
So, and I understand that it's an operations, but if those kids aren't going to get a full curriculum starting day one, then that 180.
But they are, Carla. They're going to get a full remote synchronous learning from day one, as the schedule shows.
So they could potentially have teachers teaching twice the kids in a remote setting until you hired other teachers, potentially.
I don't have specific answers because I don't know yet what I've got available. Remember, none of us have done this before.
Right.
So we're trying our best to put all these things together, which is another reason why we need to do the phased-in approach, so we can test all of this as we go through it.
And so I guess what I might ask for this is, I understand, like, I can't even imagine the concept of trying to put these schedules together, but if this works out perfectly and we have enough teachers and the numbers work, could we take a look at revisiting that to push it up if we don't end up having problems that you anticipate that you're going to have?
I think that request was already made, and you said you were going to talk to the principal about that, correct, John?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Tom?
She said it a little bit better than I did, but I'm going to change topics here a little bit because I think we have a bit of a protocol problem, Chuck, and I think we can address it if we're careful. In particular, our agenda calls for preliminary school reopening plan discussion and vote. Does not call for a calendar discussion and vote. But the calendar is included in the reopening plan.
Yes.
And so if we are able to amend the motion to approve both the reopening plan and the calendar, then I think we will be okay and not run afoul of anything.
Yeah, I noticed that when I printed the agenda that it wasn't under there for a vote.
Yeah. And to that end, I have a question or a request on the calendar. I'd like the committee to think about whether we want to request this. When I'm looking at the calendar, I'm looking in particular at the number of, in-service days we have, and we've been able to move some of them around to adjust a little bit from a calendar perspective. We have most every one of them around a holiday. The exception is our March 19th one. And considering the hill we're about to climb in learning and training between our teachers, our students, I'm considering making a motion that we move that March 19th in-service day up to October 30th. And the reason why I'm proposing or thinking about that is it would give us more in-service days in the period of time at the beginning of the year when we're just learning how to do things, learning this new model. It would provide, a couple of weeks in between each of those. It would alternate a little bit so you're not always the same group that's impacted by it. And it would mean that if things go back to quote unquote normal, which would happen much later this year or next year, then when we get into school, we would have more contiguous learning time in school. And again, that day in March right now is not around any holiday. It doesn't provide any other, long-term weekend or anything else like that. So I just want to open that up for discussion. And then based upon what I said about the protocol, I will withdraw my old motion and create a new motion that includes both.
Well, before we have a motion on the in-service part of it, John, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, Tom did bring this up, and I purposely left it just the way it was because it had already sent it out. to the
No, I'm
committee.
not talking about the calendar. I was talking about the vote on the calendar. I was talking about changing the in-service day from March to.
Yeah, that's.
Oh, okay. All right.
That's what
Go
I'm,
ahead.
that's what I'm talking about. My only hesitation with doing it, first of all, they're on Fridays, so those are remote learning days to begin with. So it's not like there's an in-person day that's getting removed. But my concern is we're going to need some time at the end of the year to plan for next year. And if that's always been the purpose of the March day, is to have it there as a way to start planning for the next year. So that's the only reason why I would and not move it. I think we're going to be coming to you again and moving these days again. So I see that these may have to get moved depending on what happens. So I'm not sure this is the last time you're going to be voting on this calendar.
Tom, are you comfortable with that answer? Or?
I mean, I understand that answer and I appreciate it. I think, and it may be too late, and that might be part of your feedback, but we don't generally have that Friday before Memorial Day off, so that's a new one on the calendar generally. So it's a little bit of a, it's 2 months later, so maybe it's not good enough in terms of planning, but we do have that additional day to address that one concern. So I'm just, again, I think we're going to have a lot to learn this fall. And I think if things go better, it's more likely to go better in the spring, and we may have an ability to do more catch up. I acknowledge that our remote learning is going to be better this fall, and we, have to cover all the curriculum anyway. I'm just trying to think about how best we can optimize the time in building if and when we're able to get there. And I think it's more likely to happen in the spring. That's all. If nobody else is of the same opinion, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure we discussed it.
Okay. Aaron?
I'm curious about December 24th. On the calendar, you show it as a school day. On the description,
it's a holiday. It's vacation.
Okay. Because in the description, you have it listed as vacation. So that should be an H on the 24th? V. Okay. And same with, and then November 11th should be an H?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks, Aaron. Sean?
To Tom's point about the dates later in the year, I kind of like the idea of leaving it as is for now. I think that, things are going to continue to change and flip-flop on us probably well into the spring in terms of, moving in and out of models and things like that. So having some flexibility with in-service days makes a lot of sense there. I think the other thing too, just frankly, is that, we all know that these models are going to, any of these models that aren't basically fully back in person are going to put some stress and strain on families, and building in a few kind of long weekends, if you will, throughout the whole year is probably not a bad thing to do. That doesn't help the teachers who have to work on those days, but for the rest of the families, that's another plus of having these spread well into the spring.
Tom, did you have?
Yeah, just I'm good with that. I just wanted to make sure we talked about it and had the conversation. There's one more that I had a question about in alignment somewhat to what Aaron was asking about different days. January 27th, it says tentative teacher and service day. Is that an early release day, quote unquote, that we're planning, or is that a holiday?
No, that actually shouldn't be there.
Okay, so that'll cross off.
Yep.
Lots of moving parts we're all trying to account for.
Okay, Tom, did you want to read that motion?
So, yeah, I will, first, I'm going to withdraw the previous motion. And the previous motion says move to approve the fall reopening overview as presented with understanding that the situation is fluid and changes to the plan are likely. I'm going to withdraw that. And my new motion is going to be move to approve the fall reopening overview inclusive of the revised 2020 school year calendar as presented with the updates discussed, with the understanding that the situation is fluid and changes to the plan are likely.
Second.
Seconded
Can I
by
ask a
Sean.
procedural question?
Yes.
We had the amendment on the old part, so do we have to make that amendment again? Where we had already voted on it?
Now, Tom rephrased the motion, so it's inclusive of the amendment now.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect.
I would, yeah, okay, inclusive of the, you didn't use the word amendment though, you used something else.
Yeah, I'll see if let me recraft it real quick as I talk through this. Move to approve the fall reopening overview, inclusive of the revised 2020-2021 school year calendar and the previously approved amendment, with the understanding that the situation is fluid and changes to the plan are likely. Does that sound good?
Yes. Or a second?
Second.
Second. Is there any?
Thank you, John.
Any further discussion? Okay. Again, I know it's been said, but we do appreciate it, the level of work and detail, Dr. Doherty, that you and you know the central office and building staff and all the work that everybody put in. We also appreciate all the input from community and staff and teachers and you know, it's, as everyone said multiple times, it's a difficult decision where there's no good decision. So we appreciate everybody's patience with that. Thank you. So
We have one more public comment.
okay,
I'll go ahead and read it.
you
Chuck.
want to read it? Yeah.
Sure. I am a specialist teacher. I'm not worried about being in school all school days. My concern is about the number of students I will be seeing over a 2-week period. As a part-time teacher, the number of students I will be teaching in person every 2 weeks is approximately 500 students. That's extremely concerning. Please verify the school committee understands this number before voting. Thank you. Amy T. Hussey, Master of Education, Visual Arts Specialist Teacher, J.W. Kellum, and Josh Wheaton, Reading Public Schools.
John, do you have anything to say to that, or?
I don't, Chuck. I've said it a few times. I know that the specialists have more kids overall than the other teachers. We don't have a model where I can cut their student load. We just aren't able to do it. We tried. We looked at different ways to do a semester on, semester off. We couldn't do it. We couldn't pull it off.
Thank you.
John, earlier you had said that number didn't sound accurate, though. Can you elaborate on that?
Aaron, I'll be honest with you. I don't have the rosters in front of me. I don't know what to tell you.
But they did arrange it that nobody would be switching schools within the same week. Is that correct?
No, we're not. No, we're not able to do any of that. I tried to explain that earlier. We looked at semester on, semester off. We looked at quarter on, quarter off. We couldn't do any of that. Because we share specialists among the 5 elementary schools, art and music I'm talking about, we're unable to do that.
I'm just going to put this out there. Do we need to look at hiring more art and music teachers in order to lower the risk for our staff and our students?
We can certainly look into that. I can't tell you that it's going to reduce it drastically. I mean, essentially, you're probably going to have to have close to a art and music teacher in every building.
And what do we have now?
We have 3 music teachers and 2.7 art teachers.
And are they going to rise, or this is between the
No,
5 elementary?
we're going to do remote music classes.
So this would require 2 more music and 2.3 art.
Yep.
So back of the envelope, 300,000, give or take.
Yeah. Any other questions or discussion? Are we ready for the vote? Carla?
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
Aaron?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Chuck? Aye. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Move ahead.
Thank you.
Is there, that's the
agenda.
That's the agenda.
Do you want more?
Chuck, can I raise one point?
Absolutely.
We need to appoint 2 new social media coordinators for the next month.
Okay, right. Thanks for bringing that up. Does anybody volunteer?
I'm happy to do it, but does that require an agenda item? Just lest we get into trouble, because it's our
protocol
procedure.
issue. Yeah, it's
No.
procedure issue.
I'm happy to volunteer.
John, did you
I
want to do
volunteer as
it, or
tribute.
you want?
I'll do it as well.
Okay, so it's Sean and John. The other thing that just what you made me think of it, Aaron, is we are going that we definitely know we will have to have more meetings. We just wanted to get through tonight to figure out what we need to do next, and imminent. I mean, right now is the policies. There's a few of them, I guess, that have come out, and
Yeah.
Dr. Doherty sent them over to Michael Joyce, and we also had a conversation earlier today with Colby on it as well. And my sense from Colby was that she's thinking that it probably needs some changes before we vote on it. So that's why we didn't bring it up tonight.
Yeah, we're going to have to put some of them by Colby as well, because there's personnel pieces and
Yeah.
I know the mask policy. Especially.
Okay. Is there a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Tom,
Aye.
Carla,
Aye.
Aaron,
Aye.
Sean,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Chuck, aye. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.